were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Milo?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. Now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You forbear me. John, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Hello, people. Welcome to The Narrative. Episode 6. We're back. I was gone for 3 or 4 weeks or something like that. I'm nervous. I don't know why I'm so nervous. I was already on a couple streams since being back, but there's something different, I will admit. All these veterans at Badlands who have been officially pressing buttons behind the scenes, making the magic of streaming shows happen. It's a lot of pressure. I can handle it. Going to get back in trial by fire. For anybody who is not aware, I was gone for a couple of weeks because we were in the midst of welcoming my firstborn turned out to be son, Baby Bright, into the world. He was born on January 1st, 2025, and we did not plan it that way. I thought that was pretty cool. So everybody's healthy, Mrs. Bright's healthy, Baby Bright's healthy. Very much appreciate all the messages. Feel a little bit bad for John. I didn't realize, we didn't want to talk about this kind of stuff, obviously, ahead of time, but I didn't realize there was going to be people messaging him for 2 weeks thinking that I quit Badlands. I thought I made it pretty clear that I had not. But the contract settlement went well. My holdout was effective. John basically backed up the Brinks truck. I now am 51% owner of the company. If you say it on a stream, it's true. So anyway, that's what's been going on over here. We are sleep deprived. Mrs. Bright is even more sleep deprived than I am. She's on baby duty now. He already has my schedule in terms of waking and sleeping, which I'm told is normal, but I'm not sure how much longer that's going to last. Anyway, back to the narrative. This show is about narrative warfare. It's about the stuff that I Trojan horse into every conversation anyways, and there's plenty of stories going on since I left, some of them entertaining, some of them poorly written, some of them entertaining because they are poorly written, and we're going to talk about a bunch of those tonight. I wanted to play this clip because this is the vibe I want to get across. Oh my god. A faux pas. The audio didn't work in the clip. I'll have to play it during the show. It's the We Back Up clip from The Wire. The whole show is derailed now. I messed it up. Before I get to welcoming my guests for tonight's show, I want to thank our sponsors. And our first sponsor for tonight's show is our friends at EasyRx. Thank you to our partners at EasyRx for sponsoring The Narrative. For more than 13 years, EasyRx is focused on your health by providing top-notch medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, or other popular antibiotics and viral care medications. The ordering process is simple. Prices are unbeatable. Now is the perfect time to stock up on essentials for you and your family. If you want to rest assured that you and your loved ones are ready for anything, you need to go to badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx, stock up on antibiotics and other necessary medications. Use promo code Badlands for a 10% discount on purchases over $150. That's promo code Badlands, badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx. Thank you very much to our friends for sponsoring this show and for moving their sponsorship to this week. I had to cancel last week because of baby stuff and all that. And we are also brought to you by our friends at River. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgages, tuition on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60, and it's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is in finding a way to hold on to your dollar while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to reap the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2 times the rate of most high-yield savings accounts and 16 times the rate on the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started at badlandsmedia.tv/river. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. So once more, thank you to our sponsors. Couldn't do it without them. All right, and as for my guest, it's the person I was going to have on episode 1, but he was rascaling around, driving around the whole country, as he's wont to do. He does have an ability to teleport. If you guys have not met him in person, he can be present in one moment, and then he'll be gone in the next. Probably engaged in another interesting conversation with somebody else. He's the other person who talks about narratives as much or more than I do, and he's been doing it for quite a long time. You already knew who it was going to be. My good friend, the Chris Paul.
Hello,
go, man.
Good to see you.
Yeah, do you know the We Back Up clip that I totally butchered?
I don't. I would like to see it.
You know what? We're going to do it the old-fashioned way.
Wasn't it just on mute or something?
Well, I downloaded a video, and it's playing automatically on mute because I probably did things wrong and didn't import the audio, but thanks to the power of pressing buttons, I can now do this.
That works.
I want you to put the word out there that we back up. Understand me? We back up.
Now, that's a y'all must have forgot moment for the narrative. Talking all this ish on the streets of Harlem, Baltimore, and the rest of it, thinking the narrative isn't coming back. But me and Chris are putting the word out that we back up. The narrative is back
up. Wait a second. Did people actually think that your show was like going away, that you quit or something?
Either a sizable number of people believed that, or the usual like 3 accounts pretending to be a lot more accounts. So I'm sure that's what it is.
There's a lot of that aspect.
Yeah. And I know, you have no other shows going on, so this fits perfectly into your run of Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then your own shows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. I took a day off on Thursday. I'm kind of spacing my thing out now because I just do a live stream in the afternoons. And so those end up running like 2.5 hours.
Right.
And so I figure do that 3 times a week, and that's already 7.5 hours. And then I have a subscriber stream on, do that 2 times a week. That's 5 hours. I have a subscriber stream on Wednesday. I can't even say my own schedule right.
Yeah. Nobody can. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I did like 11 hours of shows last week for myself, and then another 8 up to last night with Badlands. And now, I guess what your show's probably 6-7 hours long.
Well, I was going to say, now the co-hosts understand. They're like subjecting themselves to cold therapy in the week leading up, hot and cold therapy, ice baths, getting ready. But one of the things I was thinking about before having you on tonight is it's so funny. You and I talk to each other almost every day. Privately, we do the show on Tuesday nights, and Mrs. Wright earlier tonight, she's like, "Oh, you guys have a good vibe. That'll be such a good show. Obviously, it's a natural fit." What's funny is that I love doing Story Hour, and I think in some ways it's good that the movies like give us something to anchor around.
Yeah.
But every time you and I tend to be going off somewhere, and I like that. Like I like just the natural weaves. As you do as well. And the movies bring us back. So tonight, I had joked earlier when I put the show notes out that, we're going to come up with an agenda and completely ignore it. But this is a show where we can just go wherever we want. I've got a couple things that I have top of mind. I named the show Sovereign State. And, it's meant, I think, what we've been doing on the show so far is the first half, we'll talk about some actual narratives that are in the news cycle right now, the story right now, whatever we want to talk about. And then the second half is more general, big picture stuff. And for me, what's been top of mind is sovereignty is always pretty top of mind. You talk about that all the time. And statism. And I know you've been thinking about statism quite a bit recently. The other funny thing about us not doing a show like this, a long form show, is that even though we talk to each other all the time, like we don't have the time to listen to each other or read each other's like independent work all that much. People will be like, "Oh, did you see Chris's latest podcast? Or did you read this Burning Bright?" It's like, probably not, because we talk to each other and haven't been able to. So, what's the story right now? What's like your favorite just story going on? For whatever reason. Favorite because it's so good, so bad it's good.
I mean, I'm such a generalist about all of it. I kind of just try to take it all in holistically. But the layers under the California thing are really interesting. The ridiculousness of the top layer is really interesting. The war stuff, I'm always a little bored with. I love Nicolas Maduro. That stuff is just the absolute best. And it's it's such a hill to climb with the feelings that they've kind of set in place, and it's not quite as contentious as the Israel thing, but it's all of these situations are like the same situation in different versions. And the Venezuela one, you have to get past people's understanding of Maduro as a communist dictator, because that's been hammered into our heads. Maduro ruined the economy. He's a communist dictator. He steals these elections. When you remember that the same sources telling you that are the same ones who told you to wear 2 masks, it's like, okay, well, let me put that aside and see if I can find any way that the Nicolas Maduro situation matches up with some of these other situations. You find out it kind of matches up with all of them.
Right.
And in the way that they have actually. See, the crazy thing is people are like, Venezuela's so backwards. Venezuela's probably ahead of us conceptually, because they've kicked the regime out earlier. And I was talking about this a bit on DPH last night, but when a country kicks the regime out, they are going to be attacked for that. And it doesn't mean necessarily kinetically, first when they're being beaten back as they have been over the last few years here. there's all sorts of just media attention and whatnot. But when they get pushed out of another country that's not America, that doesn't control the currency, then it immediately is economic manipulation, economic sanctions, destroy the economy for the people, a direct attack on the people, and then use that to destabilize the country, send in like the Antifa foot soldiers and, infest it with drugs and crime and the rest. And then you can topple the man who opposes the regime. The idea is to make the people suffer until they beg for the regime back. And so that dynamic is very easily visible there. And so, the attacks that he's a communist dictator, according to the Western media and think tanks, don't care. The attacks that he has destroyed the economy, no, the same people have destroyed the economy. They do it all over the world. We don't need to pretend it's different here because the think tanks tell us he's a communist dictator.
That the Maduro thing is interesting, and that's the word that comes to mind that we use quite a bit is templates, right? There's actual templates before he's rising up sort of on a sovereign level. It's kind of a petrodollar template nation where again, like you said, they use those economic sanctions if you get off of the petrodollar, which he's obviously notorious for doing. So there's a template of getting these countries on the Western globalist system. Then there's sort of like an SOP, like the deep state just goes down a standard operating procedure run sheet of, we got one of these strong men screwing around down there. What's the SOP? All right, like triage 1, blitz the media with he's bad, he's really, really bad. And if that doesn't work, he's extra really bad.
Yep.
Then, you run the media through that. You get the local protests going, which could be 35 people filmed at various angles, and you present it as Venezuela is up in arms. We saw this during the Arab Spring movement during the Obama administration, where you're seeing people in Egypt rising up supposedly against guys on tanks, and you just go, well, surely the guys with tanks are bad, because I've seen movies before. I understand story templates. And the Maduro thing's interesting because I'm not saying we were the only ones, but I will say that publicly, you were the only other account I saw that day when all this stuff was going on a couple of months ago, saying like, hold up. The reverse indicator thing that I think we use a lot, it isn't a foolproof, that's not the end of analysis. But one of the things I often say is, it is a good start of analysis. The reason that I talk about storytelling all the time, it's not just because I think so much of the narrative is fake. And again, you talk about that all the time. So much of what we're being told about the world is not true, i.e. fake. The reason I focus on narrative so much is very simply, you can learn everything you need to learn about whichever apparatus you're looking at, judging by the story that they're telling you, right? The story that they are trying to convince you of is going to tell you something about that party, that entity, whether or not the story they're telling you is true. So I think you and I were doing that with Maduro and going like, hey, I don't know a lot about Nicolas Maduro. I've learned a lot more than I did know, but ironically these days, it's the opposite game. It's often the negative indicator of the media going after somebody. And now I sort of see us as having reverse engineered a lot of those templates. They're running down their template playbook, like their narrative template playbook, to smear a guy like Maduro. But to us, that's just fitting them neatly into, well, the last time you did this with these 4 other leaders, turned out they were super base. They kind of came around to our side. Their countries are going in a positive direction. So that's sort of how I see. That's sort of how I see this going with Maduro. That it's put like a reverse magnifying glass on why is this guy being called a threat to the regime? Why is he being called the favorite word that they use for people like him, Putin, Xi, etc., is strongman. So that's become a bit of a reverse indicator. So for him, I sort of see it as it's this opposite template that seems to map onto reality way more than what they're telling us.
Yeah, I think it's the only thing that does. By the way, I think it's totally okay for you to say that we were the only 2 people saying that. I actually had been looking at Venezuela for a really long time. and specifically because of Guyana, because Guyana has kind of the same pattern that Thailand has with China, that Hong Kong has with China, that Ukraine has with Russia. You know, these little kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to call them satellite states, but they're states that are they're areas that are very clearly part of the bigger whole right next to them, but controlled by either one of the European, like they're a French colony or a Danish colony or an English colony or whatever. They are these strange regime strongholds in resource-rich parts of the world that happen to be right next to the biggest countries with the most resources, the potential superpowers who oppose the regime. And so when I started learning about Guyana, I don't know, a couple of years ago, it became pretty clear to me that what was happening in Venezuela was very similar to what was happening in these other countries. And we were just going to eventually be lied about. Gosh, man, my speaking is just taken a turn for the worse. The other important thing, going back to what we were just talking about before, is the role of the philanthropists in all of this as well,
right?
Because you can go through the think tank work, and it's not. It's the regime's motives are so present; they don't hide them, and they recruit global philanthropist donors and transnational corporations. It's a program. And when you recognize the program, it's like people want to get in on the detail level and tell me why the way they saw it previously is the way it is. And of course, you're going to be able to find a pattern of reporting that will suggest that. In fact, there are probably statistics all over the place telling you why this and this is better by under the regime before. It's all a big sales pitch that we have to get rid of this strongman, as you said. You know, the communist dictator. He's got to be gone. And why? Because we have to capture this oil-rich nation and bring them back under the global regime. But they're not under the global regime. The most powerful countries in the world didn't recognize Juan Guaido as president, aside from our own, because Trump did that as, you know, negotiation and whatever. He's going to say what he has to say. Many of those countries, by the way, also don't recognize Israel as a state right now. And people pretend that that's just not a real thing or that it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And half the world recognizes Palestine as a state, despite that hurting people's feelings, right? So it's like...
Well, that's true, but I think the UN does too as well, like at this point.
Right. Yeah, you know, the kind of what you said about the Western system, one of the things... I use a term, I think one of the first articles I'd written after the Righteous Russia series was called Narrative Whiplash. Just like I started writing down some of the, you know, putting the names to the terms. We both do that quite a bit. I've said a million times on these shows that I do it for my own mind to kind of organize. It's templates I'm building cognitively or narratively to then try to map more effectively, right? Like you start to see those patterns and you're like, oh, this, you know what, this looks like a bit of whiplash over here. This looks like this maps here. Some of the ciphers I end up writing about, then they don't end up applying. I'm like, I thought I was going to use this all the time. And it comes up like once, or it's too mentally cumbersome to quickly map onto anything. But there's some that stick around. And that was one of the original ones I'd written about. And the concept is something that we all recognize, narrative whiplash. It was more meant to get across the idea that what are the most effective narratives to wake people up, you know, like create the sort of awakening that most of us think is going on and that we're a part of in the world today. And for me, the whiplash idea is such that when you have the establishment, gatekeepers, the central narrative, as you call it, trying to force feed a narrative to the population that has been undermined by themselves, you create a way more powerful whiplash in the mind of that sort of observer than you would create by one of us or Donald Trump or whoever saying like, you know who's bad and who mismanaged California, for example, Gavin Newsom. And it's like, okay, well, MAGA's going to cheer for that storyline. People that don't like Gavin Newsom's going to cheer for that, but liberal Californians are going to be like, well, that's the orange man. He's bad. So obviously that's not true. But when California has spent all this time, or before getting to that topic, with Venezuela, when the globalist regime has spent all this time basically being honest these days about what they're trying to do. Like, they want everybody in one world government.
Yeah.
They want everybody subsisting on each other. They want us off of fossil fuels. They want us into wind and solar and whatever. They want to tax you for everything. When the CIA starts taking credit for regime change instead of distancing themselves from it, which Blinken is a master of taking credit for things that they probably shouldn't be taking credit for, I think that creates this narrative whiplash pattern where you get cognitive dissonance in the minds of those normies who kind of have been observing the narrative, and they're like, well, okay, I think I'm still on team globalist, team World Economic Forum, but now you guys are using as your sales pitch sort of the meme templates that MAGA and conspiracy theorists have been assigning to you. You know, like all the stuff we say they wanted, it seems like they're increasingly put in a position where they just have to come out and say that. Like, they have to come out and say, yeah, we're punishing Russia, we're punishing China, we're punishing Venezuela because they're doing business with Russia. And it used to be that those were conspiracy, and now they're just kind of owning it and being forced to go all in on their own storyline.
You know, the other thing about threats like that and claims like that, we're going to go after this country because they do business with that other country. That is not something that is in the American interest. That is something that can only be in the interest of a global regime that plans to really just map out and execute all global trade. And that is what they ultimately want to do. That's why, you know, countries that are outside of that regime network, they attempt to economically devastate them and then show that economic devastation to the world as though that is proof that everything except the global regime system leads to economic devastation. It only leads to economic devastation because they are using the collusion and the monopolization that they've created to essentially just leave one country out in the cold and threaten everyone else that if they help that country out, they'll be treated the same way. It's essentially just a big bullying pattern. And It's really, I mean, it's pure evil, of course, but it's certainly not free trade. And what they want actually is no restriction on trade by any country in favor of its own sovereignty, because even that upsets the balance of the planned trade that they want to execute. And they call that free trade, but there's nothing free about it. It's certainly not free markets.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I love the Russian theater so much, and I think that it drew me in. Initially, it drew me in because of just the absurdity of the story. And I've said before on these shows that I was actually, as a liberal, I was following the Maidan coup stuff. It was part of what blackpilled me on being a Democrat and an Obama supporter. Of course, that didn't bring me. Trump wasn't around politically at the time. There was no MAGA. It was just like you can either pick Romney or the CIA regime change Obama. So, of course, when that came back in such a massive way in 2022, I think it just hit in my mind of going, oh, wow, those Q drops that suggested coordination here between these big players like Putin and Trump, seems like this would be something that would be going on if there was a bit of a, like, I got your back payback thing going on. But on a storytelling level, when you talk about sanctions and we're talking about the regime, as you always call them, the globalist agenda, there have been so many things that the Russia-Ukraine storyline have exposed. And on a narrative level, if we think of this as narrative warfare, which you and I do, I think have emphatically been the victors, the Russia side of things. The side of sovereignty, I think, has overwhelmingly come out ahead in the story when it comes to Russia-Ukraine. And one of those threads that I think really encapsulates that is the sanctions thing. So like you mentioned, the regime on an actual level, one of the ways they punish these smaller sovereign states from not playing ball is sanctions and economic warfare, essentially abstract power projection. And then if that fails, then they go in. They'd find a way to get the U.S. in there. If it wasn't the military, it would be CIA, clandestine forces. We saw this a lot during the Arab Spring with Gaddafi. We obviously saw it a long time ago with Saddam Hussein. With Russia, it was like they, on an actual level, you and I have talked about the power is power refrain quite a bit. It comes up on Story Hour a lot. And the world is watching with rooting interests on either side of this storyline from 2022 and 2023. And I think the regime parrots, like the true believer communists who believe in the system, they believe in the power and sanctity of the system, they thought, well, I'm being told by the people on CNN and BBC that these sanctions are really going to get Russia back in line because this is how we designed the system. We designed the rules such that if somebody steps out of line, we can non-violently get them back in line. And even without military involvement, everyone, especially in Europe, has been forced to see that the sanctions not only didn't work, the ruble was the only currency that year that increased in value relative to the petrodollar when all the other ones were going down. And I think what they really lost, they being the regime, really lost on a permanent level with this whole conflict is the rest of the game board, like the global south, are all watching that, right? They're watching that, hey, you know, that kid in the yard, that kid stood up to the bully, and it turns out the bully wasn't only not able to beat him, but he didn't even try to. He just basically issued a bunch of threats. Turns out the threats were just stories, and there was nothing backing them. So again, abstract power projection. I think it was a total, like, we're seeing the inversion of their narratives. They always used to have the backing of some sort of actual power projection that they could fall back on. It seems like devolution maybe has taken that off the table. And without it, it's just people threatening each other, except Russia doesn't actually need anything from the US, so it didn't matter. And now I think we're seeing countries like Venezuela and beyond just go, hey, well, I can just hitch my wagon to these other sovereign leaders that are not treating me the way the regime does.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it likely came together. I mean, but the truth is maybe it's been around for much longer than we know. I've been going into how deeply illegitimate our government is. Did a whole episode about it on Monday, and maybe we can come back to that. But the trade routes thing, I think, is really interesting in particular because, you know, I always mention the first they go to reputation, right? And this is either with an individual or with a nation. They go after someone's reputation. They try to destroy that person, maybe destroy their business reputationally. They have compromise over countless people, whether those people know it or not. They have things that they know about those people that can be leveraged to make those people do what they want them to do. Or they're just naturally corrupt and they're happy to take the carrot and take the money and run and do whatever is necessary so that they can keep, you know, advancing within the party of false decorum, within that kind of material realm hierarchy. And if that doesn't work, then they go to the economic manipulation. And then if that doesn't work, they eventually get to the military level. But they also have, you know, control over resources, including food, and they have control over trade routes. And so, you know, I look at the Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal thing. You and I were talking about that this week. And it seems pretty clear that the point of all this is not to capture these other states and make them part of the United States, although they may be territories or protectorates or whatever, you know, they might be called. I think it's pretty clear that they want to maintain sovereign states. And there's a thing happening kind of with Puerto Rico right now that makes it look like Trump is displaying potentially that it's not about capturing these other states. But it's clear that the Navy is going to be protecting off our shores from the Panama Canal all the way up and around to the center of the map. And, yeah, man, I don't know what people think it could be otherwise. And on the other side of that map is just going to be Russia, or maybe Russia and China. And so Trump says he's going to take the Panama Canal back from China's defense, and there's no talk of war with China. They might try to drum something up over Taiwan, but that would be moronic. And maybe maybe that was the intent, to play that whole game. Well, Trump has ruined that game. And there could be discord with Russia over, whatever property, Canada or Greenland or whatever. But there's no discord with Russia over Ukraine. So those shipping routes will be totally protected on all sides through the north. And who will be kept out of that if these two countries that are, United States minus the regime and Russia, those are like the worst nightmare for a global regime, and they're going to be handling that situation together.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at this map now, I don't know if it's accurate. I'm just saying, this. First of all, if Russia has ever played Risk, the board game Risk, then all they have to do with this threat is start with 2 men on Kamchatka. Everybody knows if you play Russia and Risk, you start with the men in Kamchatka, and then you work your way out from there. So as long as they put the guys in Kamchatka, they don't have to worry about what we're doing in Greenland, I think. But yeah, I mean, you can see earlier you were talking about the proxy state template. Ukraine's obviously one of these, sort of a keystone proxy state. Then you've got Taiwan that you mentioned. But man, I was struck. I never thought of this before these narratives came up in the last couple of weeks, but it's quite something when you look at Greenland. This is another map that is a little bit better on my eyes, but this is just proposed routes, or maybe these are shipping routes in the Arctic. So you've got Greenland right here, but either way, you've got Canada and the US, you've got Alaska, and then you've got Russia here. And I think, to your point, on this map in particular, let's just say for the sake of argument, we get Greenland. And I think we see this pretty similarly. I don't necessarily think we're going to get like 51st state Greenland. I more see it being an extension of permissions, power projection, U.S. power projection, that sort of thing. If this is effectively under U.S. military control from the perspective of direct power projection, then when you're looking at this map and you believe in things like a sovereign alliance, if we get our northern neighbors to heal, which I think we're in the process of doing with our boy True, this is all us. This is all us. And then you've just got like this over here. That's, the regime. And I know we're talking about physical location, but in terms of power projection capabilities, you talk to people in the U.S. military, and a lot of them will tell you right now that a lot of the regime, what we think of as regime globalist nation states, currently don't have an awful lot of power projection compared to what they did before World War II, compared to the U.S. So if our military is under our control for the first time in a long time, and Russia's military is under their control, China may or may not be a paper tiger, but either way, they're a juggernaut when it comes to trade. Then what on earth is the regime to do here? It starts to make you look at something like Greenland. And I think I'm not sure if you've talked about this, but Trump usually is doing multiple things when he deploys a narrative, right? And I think one of the ones that he might be doing with Greenland is not just projecting forward the possibilities we're talking about, but projecting forward or projecting backward what has Greenland been used for until now. I'm not even talking about like secret bases and what are they doing in the ice. I more mean, why is this under the control of Denmark? Like even normies are kind of like, I never thought about that. And it just makes people wonder, like, why is this landmass that seems extraordinarily strategically significant from both a military and a shipping perspective, why is this under the control of Denmark? And it's because it's of strategic significance to globalists, where they seem to have just put these nodes of proxy states all over the map to sort of interrupt a mesh of sovereignty, a mesh of free trade from developing.
Yeah. We were just talking about the way that the regime manipulates economies and people, but in this case, economies. One of them, of course, is manipulating trade. What happens when they can't control any of these trade routes, when they can't control the Panama Canal? It's a lot harder to stop countries from doing business with other countries if you can't cut off their trade routes or make their trade routes really expensive. Donald Trump is handling all of these situations just using leverage with tariffs, which is honest. It's right up front. Hey, I want you to do this. If you don't do it, we're going to charge you this. There's nothing clearer than that. That's not a war. Yeah. That's not manipulation. That's saying, hey, you know what? We're going to be good with this. If you need what we have more than we need what you have, well, you're going to have to pay extra because that's not an equal trade. About Greenland, I would say that it probably flipped in 2020 when they flipped that Air Force base into the Space Force base. It was called the Thule Air Force Base. And this is a track we don't need to go down, but there's a Thule Society that started in 1917 in Germany. And I think everybody should look into that. It's very interesting. I wonder about the relationship there.
I mean, we can go anywhere.
I don't think we need to go there, though.
Okay.
It's kind of some weird, dark stuff. Prussiagate in their Urania series covered it extensively and did an excellent job. And I would suggest to everyone checking that out. The last thing I'll say about Greenland, and then I'll hand it back to you. You asked why we would want that or why there's all this particular type of attention by Trump on it right now. And I think it's because Greenland is the type of territory like a Guyana, like Thailand, like Ukraine, that if the U.S. was going to take back over under Trump's term, quote unquote, the way they would be selling it in the media, there would be a case coming from somewhere that Donald Trump was invading Greenland. Okay. And I believe that the macro picture, the narrative that's being set up is to recast Trump as Hitler and MAGA as Nazis. I believe they've been running it for years and years. And I believe Trump starts invading his neighbors is like the real kickoff point of when they go for that. So what better to do than our resource-rich neighbors to the north, our resource-rich neighbors to the northeast? Because the thing you have to remember all the time is that fake news is future history, all right? They're setting up a historical record for later in the event that at some point they win and take back control, and then they erase our history and replace it with the history that they have already set down, which is why it's so important for us to focus on actually putting that history down and figuring out ways to genuinely preserve it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think one of the most sort of surprising organic discoveries that we had recently was during the Gangs of New York episode of Story Hour. You and I had done some research into the Civil War. You'd been reading quite a bit about it leading up to that episode, and the idea that so many Americans, most, have no idea about some of the things that the U.S. government did to American citizens during that time period in order to, not just in the war, right? Like there's a certain cognitive dissonance associated with civil wars because of whoever wins writes the history. Everybody seems to know that that's true. They know it on an innate level, and yet they just like thinking, well, the good guy, thank God the good guys won because we're not reading the bad guys' history. Well, spoiler alert, the bad guys would write a history that would cast themselves as the good guys, right? Like, this is just 101, Logic 101 stuff. But besides the actual Civil War that we're told went on, most Americans have no idea that Americans were being literally killed for refusing to engage in the war in the first place. Like, that's a whole other level of terrorism, essentially, by the government onto its people. But when it comes to something that I was thinking of earlier, you kind of jogged it in one of our private chat, or no, it was on your social media feed. One of the things I say all the time, been saying it for years in my personal life as my like coup de grace, people arguing with me. is the truth doesn't become the truth. It was the truth, right? Like the truth is. It's just something. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to figure it out. That's what the goal is, to try to figure it out, right? But it's so amazing because when you hit people with that, it's like they have a moment. They know that that is inherently true. It is impossible to argue from any perspective with the statement that the truth is inherent. It is. And it's not created, it's discovered. And yet, I think people have this cognitive dissonance that we saw exemplified during the COVID era, where right now, circa 2024, people know that the story we were telling is true now, and yet they cannot assign it retroactively to the time period in which we were saying it. You know, this is something like Scott Adams syndrome that we talk about sometimes. Like, oh, no, I was totally wrong about literally everything for the right reasons. And these people that were right about everything were right about it by accident. And then they're dismissing the things we're saying right now, which is something that you've been talking about a lot. So it just makes me think of, you know, one of the sort of calls to action, I guess, if we acknowledge we're in a war of stories, we're in a mind war. I think a call to action that your deployments in the info war really stay on signal with is there is a temporal element to this stuff that is extremely important to keep that scale in your mind, that what's going on right now, the stories right now, whoever wins or loses the story right now, wins or loses the story of the future and of our past. And that means that the story right now is what needs to be attacked. It's what needs to be engaged with, rather than waiting. And we saw the clip from Liberty Den. I thought John was great talking about this when it comes to, I play with the colored hat stuff. I play with characters and who's controlling who and Zuckerberg and the rest of it. But it's not the signal is what you talk about. It's what John talked about in that clip, that we're not trying to passively observe a story that others are telling us. And I think that's what separates some people in the info war from others. Some are happy to watch and observe the story and just track it and be like, ooh, I got it right. I got another scene right in the story. And others are trying to provoke change in the story or guide the story in the direction that we want it to go in. You can only do that by refuting the things that you believe to be bullshit right now, not in the future when Joe Rogan gives you permission to do it.
Totally. I mean, a lot of people are adopting, really without knowing, just full-on regime stories and the ideologies that follow them. I mean, it's amazing to me how many people are convinced that an injustice was done over the last few days when the guy on a bike with a flamethrower somehow didn't get charged with burning down all of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And somebody was like, how could this happen? Well, what do you mean? How did he get away? How do you know he did anything? You know,
right.
That's just a picture on the internet with a story attached to it. I could just open up my image generator AI, pull up an image, put it online, write breaking with 4 sirens, and make something up.
It's usually 3 sirens. If you go 4,
right.
people know that you're being ridiculous. If it's 3, then it's very serious.
Right, exactly. So last night I said this, and I wrote something about it today as well. And I've been talking about it a little bit lately, but you talked about the goal being the truth. We agree that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to ever actually get there. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe that is not the best goal, particularly with the information environment we work in. Total fog of war. All our information is unreliable, all of it. You have to understand these things. You have to have zero trust. You have to know that there's nothing reliable, and then still figure out how to guide your path through in an effective way. That's the job. And then, we can get on to stuff like timelines and whatever else. But initially, that's the job. And So it's not to figure out what the truth is. That's impossible. It's much easier to figure out maybe that somebody's lying, but then you call them out as a hypocrite or a liar, whatever side it is in the controlled opposition dynamic. The other side will just be like, well, yeah, but your side lies and is hypocritical too. It's like, yeah, of course. Okay. The people on Fox News are hypocritical. The people on MSNBC are hypocritical. All of them are liars. So you can't do my side, your side. I'm going to own the libs by showing them that Gavin Newsom said something else. Like, no, you're not. The goal is to not get hoodwinked. And the way to not get hoodwinked is to never, ever have the reaction they're trying to coax out of you. You said it at the beginning. The point is to figure out what it is they want you to believe and to operate from there. Because these people, even when they are your favorite television characters, are rich, powerful strangers. All right? Trusting them and giving them your power and thinking because they said something, it's true, is madness.
I firmly agree with that. And I would also say, and it's like, hey, I'm the one who wrote a whole series called The Master that I still write about Donald Trump, Master of Narrative Warfare. You know, I write about some of these other figures. I've written a lot about Elon Musk and think that I think that overall there have been a lot of positive effects of that character on the story. Mm-hmm. Happy to be proven wrong about that. Certainly have been before. But I still think that your conclusion there is the signal. And I think, you know, if I want to address some people maybe that, for a show that ended in the most abysmal manner possible, Game of Thrones really did have such stellar writing until it went the way it did. But there's a scene I actually brought up in our private chat a few weeks ago, where Robert Tully, who we're presented as like a good guy, he has Jaime Lannister captured. And Jaime Lannister is this figure in the story that is kind of reviled by the honorable nations because he killed his king. They call him the Kingslayer. Yep. You know, eventually you learn that he killed the king because the king was about to commit an act of mass genocide. And in order to stop it, he killed him. Now, that's not why Jaime Lannister is a good character. He's not a good person. He acknowledges that he's not a good person. Like, he's the one who commits incest. Like, he's kind of a reprehensible character, but he's an honest character. And in this scene with Edmure Tully, there's a moment where Tully, like, he's trying to get information out of Jaime because, Edmure's like, all right, you seem to be trying to do the right thing lately. Why don't you just give us, the good side, the information so that the good side can win the war? And Jaime basically responds to him by saying, there is no good side. Like, I'm the only one calling this out. You're just trying to engage in mass genocide against my family, and they're trying to engage in mass genocide against your family. And then Tully responds by saying, like, he's basically tongue-tied, and he says, well, don't all of us have to believe that we're different? Don't all of us have to believe that what we're doing is right? And Jaime says, no, lions do not concern themselves with the opinions of sheep. And it's funny because, like, the way he comes off, you think, like, oh, he's being this dickhead, he's an enemy. But really, he's saying, you are now admitting, I've gotten you, the good guys, to the point of admitting that you, even if you didn't believe that you were doing the right thing in this war, you would tell yourself a story that allowed you to believe that you were doing the right thing. Where even though Jaime is not a good guy, he is honestly engaging in an unjust war. So it's like, I guess for me, the reason I think of it is I've been thinking about that in the context of patriots and these characters. And, like, why is there anxiety among some people in MAGA to questioning the figures, when we go back and forth about the effects of Elon Musk's narrative deployments, good or bad? And people kind of get this anxiety, like, no, those guys are on my team.
Yes.
I would say that first of all, it's stupid, but another way of me trying to address that would be, if these patriots are who we think they are, the Donald Trumps of the world, the ghosts in the machine that I think are real, like narrative warfare from the side of good people overall, they would want us to do this kind of stuff. And if they wouldn't want us to question all of these things and to locate the signal and to push forward first principles, as we try to do, then they're not the people that you think they are in the first place. So, it's sort of, to me, it's like this no-lose scenario. If you just blindly go along with everything, then you might as well just not be in the info war, because you could just have somebody tell you about it later on if you're a passive observer. And if you're actively engaging your mind in it, you're not going to ruin the plan by questioning what the plan is, or is it right, or should we go in a different direction?
Yeah, I think that's a great example with the Game of Thrones thing. I think the other thing about what Jamie said, part of what he said, is that the fact that I can see you attempting to make yourself look bigger in my eyes for effect proves that you are not my equal, right? And a lot of the times we really do still have this notion that somehow we are weak and powerless and small in number, and that our voices don't matter. Certainly our votes do not matter, but right. our voices actually do matter in a real way, because they can change other people's minds. And the way that we stand up for ideas or stand up to ideas has influence on those around us. And that's how things can actually be changed. We are so desperate for allies then in that case. We want all these media allies. We need people like Elon Musk to be on our side, because otherwise we might not defeat the Democrats. We're not fighting the Democrats. We're fighting a thousands-year-old evil cabal, and really a cabal. We can't just cower before it and pretend online that someone else is going to do it. There's a convergence happening right now. And the way that convergence is going to be won is through people's belief and willingness to represent that belief in public. And, it's kind of there's kind of that downside to Christian humility, that Christians don't often speak up because they don't want to cause the confrontations. Now, many do, I understand. But it's awfully hard to assert a good point of view if you're not willing to get behind it and face the consequences of it.
Yeah, and that even makes me think, you and I do the Story Hour show, and obviously we have been writers for a long time before this stuff, creative writers. And that's one of the things I've said a million times. One of the quote unquote weaknesses of the right, even though I hate even using that terminology, is sort of ceding territory, like ceding human territory. I don't know who I was talking to the other day. Maybe it was just somebody in my Substack comments going back and forth with, that were talking about I make my Lord of the Rings analogies all the time, and I made it in my last article talking about Aragorn. And one of the reasons I love that character is not just because it's cool and there's a good storyline there. It's that character is a Renaissance man sort of hero, where, there'll be one scene where he's killing demons to spread freedom throughout Middle Earth. And then in the other scene, the hobbits catch him singing a poem to the moon and the stars about his lost love. And that is masculine. It was this thing where the duality of man is not just good and evil. There's a dark side to men. To me, it's much more that human beings are meant to be, I use the term creation engines a lot. If God is the creator, if we exist in creation, what's the point? That's obviously the question, right? And I'm not going to answer it here. But one of the things I think about is that if God created creation, then he created things with the ability to create themselves, right? Not only can we create life, but we create art, we create stories. And I think that that's something that a lot of conservatives for a long time, or even like you mentioned, Christians, have kind of ceded that territory to communists of being communists are the ones who focus on frivolous pursuits like sculpting incredible works of art or writing stories, etc.
Well, that's because they get paid oodles of money for low quality art that will serve the regime's agenda. or
for sure
serve as a vessel for money laundering.
Right, and that's why it's like not only is it a mistake to have ceded that territory to that side of things, but it actually wouldn't be difficult to beat them at their own game, right? If you've got sort of sovereign-minded, moral-minded, morally centered creators putting forth new stories, putting forth artwork. You always use the term American Renaissance, and I certainly think we're going to get that in multiple ways. But that's another one of the reasons that I focus so much on storytelling, is that it's one of those things that people in the MAGA movement or in conservative land have kind of ceded to the other side. They're like, no, we don't focus on that. The left focuses on fake things and stories. We focus on the real stuff, like whatever Tucker Carlson is telling us, or whatever's going on Fox.
You mentioned the political spectrum a couple of minutes ago, and I want to see if I can locate this on my phone. I tried locating it on my computer, but I know I have it. There is this. Yes, here it is. This is the actual political spectrum. This is the one that makes sense rather than the one that we always. No, the one that we always see is the 4-quadrant thing.
Right.
That makes it seem like this is only about economics. This puts it in a frame, if you want to pull that up, of centralization to decentralization. Government, 100% government to 0% government. It is totally correct about all the collectivist ideologies on this side, on the left side. Those are leftist ideologies. And then the Republican Party, it has just left of the political center, the founding fathers just to the right of the political center. And I think that that's fair for the founding fathers. The Republican Party should probably be a lot further left, if not all the way left, with their partners in the Uniparty, the Democrat Party. The Republican Party, people have to understand, and the establishment still in some respect now, was taken over by neoconservatives. Neoconservatives are in the Bolshevik Nazi ideological lineage.
Yeah, they're collectivists.
They are 100% collectivists. They are militant collectivists. And the founders of neoconservatism were Trotskyites.
Yeah.
It's not confusing. And so, people are like, well, why do you go after these conning television characters? Because, these are our friends. We hang out every day, like down at the, I go to the gym and I see my friend Tucker. I go to the park and I see my friend Dan. That's not what's happening. And they are, and listen, I chose two examples that are not like hardcore neocons, but your careers in that ballpark, have their shows changed since they left Fox News? I would argue that they haven't changed at all. They're not more open and free speech oriented, except to the extent that Twitter is. But the Republican establishment is all neocon. So we have the pure communist left and the communist right, quote unquote. There's nothing right about them. They are full on global regime statists, and both of them are militant as hell. And it doesn't matter what they communicate to the public. It's what they do in reality. And what they do in reality is constant war. Trotsky liked constant revolution. The regime likes constant war. Every 80 years, they turn everything over on purpose around the world. We weren't the only revolution happening in the late stages of the 18th century.
Right.
There was the same wave in the Civil War era in the 19th century, same wave in the World War I, World War II period, and we're doing it again now. This is nothing new. This is the playbook cycling through, and it's gone on for 2,000 years. You can read the Bible and see how the world that we're in now overlaps it exactly. It's just one system. It's just one evil. And I know about the push-pull and all of that, but I think there really is a way out of the matrix, and it is not believing anything as an earthly authority. Zero earthly authorities. all of them deserve to be questioned to the utmost because they lie all the time on purpose to exploit us.
Absolutely. I want to get deeper into that pretty soon. I will. Obviously, you didn't see you were right about all of that until this weekend. But I'm happy to report, in case anybody missed it, Fox is now based because Jesse Waters had ultra MAGA influencer Tim Pool on his show to explain to MAGA whether or not Mark Zuckerberg is now MAGA. So a Fox News host had a liberal YouTuber on his show to discuss whether or not a social media oligarch is MAGA. And of course, that's silly and ridiculous. But when you see that, I think my takeaway from it was that should make you should probably laugh at it initially, which is what I did. I thought maybe it was you who posted, somebody posted it in DMs, and I'm just like, they're surely not. Surely this isn't what they thought of as the right deployment, which is why either the regime story is falling apart of its own accord, like they've been put in this situation socially and culturally where it's just falling apart in real time, or there is something to the ghost in the machine of being like, now do this, like the guys in the back, the meme we see of the memes we constantly see of Punk'd, where it's like, now have Tim Pool on and tell the audience that he is the MAGA representative. So it should be funny, but the second response to that should be that it should make you angry that these characters think that you are stupid enough to acknowledge Tim Pool as your voice, a guy who unironically used NewsGuard for 4 years on his channel to precede any opinion he was willing to give on anything, which turns out he doesn't have any opinions. I mean, I've gone on a million Tim Pool rants, but it's a microcosm to me. And we talked about this a few weeks ago when it came to rumored connections between Fox and the Daily Weimar, and then rumors that seem unfounded of the Daily Weimar to Tim Pool. But it's really interesting that it's either by the system's design that all of these characters in the quote-unquote mainstream media are now sort of merging with that alt media landscape of ultra-based influencers, or they're being exposed as part of an op. But either way, they've never been more plain to see that they are the same side, right? Like if it wasn't clear enough beforehand of what we've been saying for years now, when Tim Pool, because keep in mind, it's not just Jesse Waters who wants Tim Pool to be on there to speak to the hello fellow MAGAs. It's Tim Pool that wants to be on Jesse Waters to reach the fellow MAGAs. So it's a two-way street of sort of codifying this idea that Fox equals MAGA that he participates in.
Well, yeah, and think about what the impact would be on Fox's normal viewing audience. Oh, this man looks like a young, hip guy that's with it. Maybe we should check out his show. So Fox News is advertising the show of a retarded leftist. Why is that happening?
That clipped out.
It has to be the case that people understand the uniparty and understand that there's not any difference that in what's happening on Fox News or on MSNBC. And again, you go through these cycles of history. You want to talk about like World War II. It's important to make the distinction between the controlled opposition sides, one of which doesn't align with us at all, really about like virtually anything. So we're not getting on board with the Democrats, right? Everybody knows that MAGA's not going to like join the Democrats.
I think we're there,
right? Right? But we think, oh yeah, we can join the Republicans. Those are our people. They've always been our allies. They're not our allies at all. They're the Democrats' allies. That's why the uniparty holds power forever, because they get to claim like 95% of the American public. That gives you power all the time. and then they brand it different ways to the two quote unquote different sides. MAGA is distinct from those two things and so much bigger on its own. Okay. So what we need to do is pull out of that controlled opposition dynamic, let them keep fighting each other. It'll look idiotic. This is how it already looks to a lot of people, right? It's looked like that to us for years now.
Right.
And it needs to look like that to everybody. And it's not hard. You just simply withhold your attention and your trust and your respect. These people are not authoritative. They're not better because they're on TV. I know that their shows are very finely produced and scripted, and they're easy to watch in some respects, certainly easier than ours. It's not a huge mental load. I understand all of that, okay? I'm not asking all the world to come to Badlands and figure out what the hell you and I are talking about. That's not the test. The test is for people to leave all controlled opposition dynamics where they see them. Oh, hey, that thing is definitely a characteristic and element of the regime. I can spot that. Now that I've spotted it, if it doesn't go away from these people, I'm going to go away from these people. It's that simple.
Yeah, well said. It reminds me, I was thinking of a scene from Jurassic Park recently, the infamous, I'm probably going to butcher it, but they were so focused on whether or not they could, they didn't consider whether or not they should, right? I probably got the line wrong, but everybody kind of knows the sentiment. I think about that when I see Tim Pool on Jesse Waters on Fox, or any of these characters, especially in the Foxverse, the Fox extended universe. Like, they really are like Marvel characters, where we've now got a shared cinematic universe where it was like you had the Fox conservative sphere, you had the liberal retard sphere on CNN, then you have like the alt media cool sphere of YouTubers, and now you're getting crossovers where there's even been like a couple of, like, Chris Cuomo was in the retarded CNN sphere, and he's kind of rebranded a little bit and joined the alt media universe, and now the alt media people are joining the Fox conservative verse. But it makes me think of that line, that there are some within MAGA that cheer when they see stuff like that, of the waking up the normies refrain that you talk about a lot, where it reminds me of, you're so concerned with whether or not we could, you never stop to think about whether or not we should. And I even think of this in the sports world. I've been following the UFC forever, like since the late 90s anyway. And a lot of OG UFC fans are lamenting the state of the sport right now, not because the fighters are not good. The quality of the sport is arguably the best it's ever been. Like, the number 30 guy today is probably way better than the number 30 guy from 10 years ago. But the presentation of the sport is so mainstream. Like, it's on ESPN. The red corner wears red gloves. The blue corner wears blue gloves. They walk out of a sanitized environment. Like, the camera shots are the same with everything. They show you the same statistics. They do the fight. They run the video package. Whereas 15 years ago, when you're watching MMA events, you're turning on Pride in Tokyo, and they're putting the Russian on a pedestal and raising him up in an arena and doing all this crazy shit. They got a sumo guy banging drums. Like, why? Because fuck you. Because fuck you. That's why. Like, that's why we did this, and it was awesome. And, all of what I'm saying, I don't make it a sports analogy, but why were people watching the fight? Like, they were watching the fights, they like the fights, but what a lot of them are realizing as they're falling out of fandom of the UFC, the fights are better than ever. Why are they losing fans? Because the story sucks. The story that the fights are in absolutely suck. And again, MMA fans, UFC fans wanted to be the mainstream for so long. They wanted to be taken seriously by ESPN, by Fox Sports, etc., that they kept changing the sport and homogenizing it and making it more TV friendly. And now that we got there, they want to go back. And I think that there's a subset of MAGA that when they see Tim Pool on Jesse Waters, they're like, he's almost one of us. We could be on Jesse Waters, us, the MAGA movement. And, I would just say that if you're there as stretched as that analogy might have been, you might want to consider whether or not we should be striving to be at that dance, or whether or not, like you said, we want to just kind of like, let's go over here. Let's do our own thing.
Yeah.
Did I lose you?
Wow, I think I just blipped out. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
okay.
You just froze on my screen.
Might have been my internet.
Yes, when I talk about this stuff, particularly mentioning certain characters, people get pretty upset. And I don't think that they're getting upset because they believe that what that character says is true. I don't think that they believe that that character is particularly helpful. I'm not even sure that they actually believe that character is helping to wake up the normies, which is always the excuse. And again, what happened to lions don't concern themselves with the opinions of sheep, right? You can't just spend your life hoping that other people change their opinions. Like, we've got to move forward on our own. But I think that what people are getting upset with is that they can sense the social hierarchy, right? And if you are in the party of false decorum, then they understand that, like, Charlie Kirk is more high ranking than we are. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. All these people are more high ranking. So we are not, in their eyes, allowed to insult people who are higher ranking. That's just how it goes. You can't do that, or you're not going to get to that place. Like, we're supposed to be nice to them and kiss their asses and say, "Oh, Jesse Waters, how can I help you before you will look like you're sort of helping me?" I don't care about that, right? I am totally comfortable with whatever the cards say when they come down. Authenticity, tell the truth. Eventually that stuff is going to collapse in on itself, because people don't need that. There's nothing, there's nothing to it.
Yeah. One of the, it's funny, I think that this sentiment might be well-meaning, but I think is wrong. That there, we've all heard the crabs in a bucket analogy. A lot of times it gets applied to communists. If anybody somehow doesn't know that analogy, it's the idea that if you fill a bucket at the beach with crabs, they will climb each other to try to get out, but the top one usually doesn't make it out of the bucket because the other crabs pull him down. They instinctively pull other crabs down. So I think people, when we're criticizing figures like this, when you describe the hierarchy, there is that's what when they're getting upset about it, they are, to your point, automatically imprinting that hierarchy. They're automatically putting themselves as below a Charlie Kirk, a Jesse Waters, whoever it may be. So they perceive attacks or criticism of characters like that as crabs in a bucket. They're like, you're just doing what the communists do. You're just dragging other people down. Where, to your latter point, we want to tip the bucket over, right? We don't want to be in a bucket anymore, trying to erect systems of hierarchy. We want to be on the beach where we can go wherever we want to go. We can set up our own little thing over here. You can do your gay stuff over there. And we can make fun of it, right? But that's what I think that's what maybe well-meaning people who are like, no, we need unity. I mean, we talked about this a lot lately, the unity fallacy, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I think that's what they're thinking. They're thinking we are trying to build a taller tower, a taller hierarchy of legitimacy than the hierarchy of the leftists that we're trying to tear down. But that is not the mission. That's not the right mission, to build some sort of unified vision of hierarchy. And as you call it, the party of false decorum. That's going to get you. That's going to get you in the same exact spot. And one more point that I want to toss back to you. I could apply this template to the same thing we're seeing with the TV characters. A couple of years ago, I'd written an article. It was during when COVID was still being super gay, called "Too Small to Fail." And the basic premise of it was projecting, like, all right, how is the American economy going to rebound in a way that suits America First's sovereign-minded interests in the wake of how devastating the COVID era was to a lot of businesses, where you've got mom and pop stores having to close down, et cetera. And I kind of come up with this theory of too small to fail, where we're coming out of this era of too big to fail. You know, we've got the banks that get bailed out. We've got vehicle manufacturers that get bailed out. Unions get bailed out. So what about the mom and pops? How do we get to too small to fail? And I think that the COVID era actually kind of exposed that these mega corporations and manufacturers, they're operating on such small margins, like 1%, 3% margins, that any disruption or realignment, going back to our earlier conversation about trade routes, any disruption in that devastates those major globalist corporations and is actually good for independent and small and medium businesses. So I think that's kind of working itself out. But I kind of apply that to the convergence we're seeing with these TV characters. When I say we've got Fox people, we've got Con Inc. people, we've got YouTubers based in red-pilled YouTubers, they're all converging right now. In that article, I'd said, like, you know, how can you see that it's not actually going well for globalist companies? Consolidation comes before collapse. One of the biggest fallacies that people have is they'll see some deal get done and it'll have billions of dollars attached to it in a headline. And they're like, ooh, big thing happened economically. This must be good. Where really what's happening is a hostile takeover. Major corporations are not merging because they think it's a good move. They're merging because they have to merge. Like Paramount Pictures didn't sell to Skydance because they were doing well. They sold to Skydance because Hollywood is in free fall collapse. The only reason David Zaslav took over Warner Brothers is because it's an open secret that he wants to pump its value and dump it because it's so overvalued basically right now. Undervalued. And I think the same thing might be going on in like the social sphere where we've got these figures. It's annoying to see them all consolidating and being like, well, we knew these fuckers were mainstream media. They were just on YouTube. But I actually think long-term, it's a good thing because of all the things you just said. Like, it's making it more clear than ever before that these people probably already were on the same side if they're now unifying in a very public manner.
Yeah, and it also occurs to me that people seem really desperate to, like, make sure that Fox News just continues to exist forever. And I don't care if Fox News exists or doesn't exist. It's got nothing, the information landscape will be whatever it is. It's just weird that people want to say it or save it because they've been lying for decades about really, really important things. And the truth is that it is basically a commercial for big pharma and various kinds of government money laundering. And between that, you have actors reading scripts to create a fake reality for you. I don't know why someone wants to consume that. And I understand watching a little bit of it as a barometer for what people en masse are getting, but it's not real. And you have to make sure that we remember it's not real. You talked about the unity thing. There has never been less of a point to unity. There's no election coming up. Our elections aren't real in the first place. People spent the last year or 2 years, actually, even during the Ron-Op, telling us we had to be unified with these terrible people who turned and directed the hate movement against MAGA, tried to blame Donald Trump in a highly public fashion for essentially genocide through the vaccine. These people are not our friends. So we don't have an election coming up. Elections are fake. It didn't matter then, but at least I understood people's motivations and their kind of panic and desperation that led them into that. We can get past that now. The Senate is illegitimate. The Congress is illegitimate. We do not need them to pass any legislation. We don't want them to pass any legislation. Why would I want any of those people to write more rules about how my life is governed? Zero. Okay? We don't need them to pass more spending. There's no part of our government that needs to be funded with additional spending from them. It's not even spending. It's just the central bankers printing more fiat money from nothing whose value exists on the backs, the literal backs of the American people, the sweat and labor and sometimes lives of the American people. So we don't need them to pass spending. We don't need them certainly to declare wars, and we don't need them to dismantle the administrative state and the illegitimate government. Donald Trump has all the tools he needs for that. And, the Supreme Court, however legitimate that is, and it probably isn't, has at least in the public understanding reset some of the stuff around that to a more constitutional basis, which will allow Donald Trump to, kind of skip some speed bumps, maybe.
Yeah, the way I sort of think of the Supreme, I think it's always an interesting thought path to go down in terms of when we talk about the legitimacy or lack thereof, like on a baseline fundamental level of government, of our government, whether a good government or a very bad government. It's interesting to go down that thought path with regards to the goals of like an America First sovereign movement. And one of the ways that I try to square your point about the Supreme Court, like for the sake of argument, let's just say we don't particularly consider the Supreme Court leading up to the Trump era to be legitimate. Their decisions visited very real effects onto the nation because of the systems in place that consented and used enforcement mechanisms based on those decisions. So you can make the same argument going forward. That's not super satisfying to me because if we think that the underlying structure of that system is illegitimate, then I'm not a big fan of just like taking that and making it ours now and now using it in a good way. But maybe a way that I try to find a middle ground. First of all, I always try to think of this era, however long it stretches, as sort of a transition era. And I think the beginning and end of it is going to be very gray. Like with the benefit of hindsight, we'll know more about that. The way I try to square it is saying, okay, if we're thinking about things in purely a narrative perspective, there is a real power, unfortunately, in an institution like the Supreme Court. I hope that in the future that's not the case, but I sort of see what Trump did is he always excels at putting the enemy, like the enemy player, into an untenable position.
Yes.
And I think that rather than try to dismantle their system by going head on at it, he did that with certain deployments, but I think most of the time he's kind of doing this quote unquote restoration approach where he's like, oh no, I'm going to use the rules of the game as you, the system, have set them out. And within the rules of this game that I am consenting to, I'm going to change them. And, he did that by getting his, three Supreme Court picks.
Three.
Totally remade the Supreme Court. That doesn't make me think that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court is somehow more now than it was, because if we're counting on the right 9 fucking people or the right 5 people interpreting our rights, then we've gone somewhere terribly wrong. But in the short term, I think it's fascinating to see the position it's put the enemy faction in, because they're almost in a position where they are starting to advance a lot of our arguments because they have to argue against whatever is pushing the MAGA agenda forward. So if the MAGA agenda is coming out of the Supreme Court that for a limited time, they have to start attacking all the processes that allowed that to take place. And the same thing seems to be going on in various theaters, like whether that's the DOJ, the justice system, the military, the powers of the commander-in-chief. I think that's a big one. We've talked about on Power Hour quite a bit, the idea of narrowing of presidential authority or defining of presidential authority. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I square it all. Like Trump is using the story and the rules they set out and basically saying like, well, I'm just doing what you guys did. Is that okay? Or can we all now agree that it's actually illegitimate and we need to move into something different?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that you touched on something really important there, and that's that there's an entire kind of constantly morphing ideology that is at all times anti-Trump. And so Donald Trump will take an initial position, and the people who are anti-Trump will react negatively to that position. And you could see it throughout the DeSantis op. It's not like it's only Republican, quote unquote Republicans, neocons who are anti-Trump. They and the uniparty left will come together in agreement on certain points that Trump definitely has this thing wrong, or that Trump can't do it. And what they'll do is figure out different ways that represent their individual brands to communicate the fact that Trump is wrong and Trump is not allowed to do this thing. And so they make all of these arguments on the one side. They explore the entire range of issues on a subject, giving that one interpretation. And then Trump later on is just like, oh, yeah, we're going to go the other direction. This over here is what the American people want. So we're going to do that instead. So go ahead and argue against that now.
Right.
And they do that. and everybody witnesses them doing that after they had already made up their minds, having seen the two sides of the uniparty work in controlled opposition to agree that Donald Trump is wrong, definitely, and then argue about what should actually be done, which makes them look like they're in opposition. They are always in agreement that Donald Trump and MAGA are wrong, that the sovereign movement is wrong. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the best things you can watch. And man, if people think that the neocons are trying to provide some interesting critique of Donald Trump, it is unnecessary. We've got that covered.
Right. Yeah, it's perfect because, and again, this is why when people are like, oh, well, Trump said this and you're arguing the opposite. It's like, well, first of all, that's very rarely the case, which is why we spend so much time, or especially I spend a lot of time really looking at actually what he's saying, which I often believe is as brilliant as he led up to the 2024 election, telling you it is with all of his weaves and saying you should pay attention to him. In terms of going back to the Greenland stuff, the Canada stuff, I mean, that stuff has been absolutely fascinating to me lately. I know we've talked about it on a lot of shows, but even an example of Trump's comms, he had the Truth Post where he said many people in Canada love being the 51st state. Then he went on to talk about tariffs and trade deficits and taxes and security, right? And hey, maybe it's nothing, but the phrasing, many people in Canada love being the 51st state. Like, they love the idea of being the 51st state. There isn't they would love to be it. He said they love being the 51st state. And maybe it was accidental, but either way, it got my mind going down a lot of the rabbit trails that is why I wanted to talk about sovereignty in general and some of those deployments with you. It made me think that whatever's going to happen on an actual level with Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal, etc., there's more going on here from a narrative level, like a mass psychological level. And I think a huge part of this, I'm not sure if you've talked about this on your podcast, is simply the conversation, the international conversation about sovereignty. And I know that sounds so simple and like broad picture, but the vibe I was pulling out of a lot of Trump's deployments, especially around Canada and then Greenland, is he's hiding in plain sight amidst all the bombast of 51st state, etc. He's directing all of the communications at the people of Canada, at the people of Greenland, at the people around the Panama Canal. He's talking about that Panama has been like traded back and forth as this nation state, that Greenland owes its allegiance or owes fealty to Denmark. And I thought it was pretty funny that you've got Greenland's leader here, not so much endorsing what Trump says, but Greenland's leader says he's ready to talk to Trump. He said he addressed the Trump comments at a press conference. He said she'd asked for a meeting. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen was this guy. He said at a Copenhagen press conference when asked if the Greenland leader had contact with Trump, I don't know how to pronounce this, Ajid responded, no, but we are ready to talk. just talking about common relations, getting in the same room, etc. But Politico was running features the last couple days where they're interviewing people in Greenland, Greenlanders, and they were surprised to learn that the opinion is split there over Trump's narrative deployments. And again, just getting away from whatever the fuck happens with Greenland in the future, it feels like Trump is saying, listen, Canadians, Greenlanders, everyone, you can just be Americans, and it's not about getting a U.S. passport. It's about what is an American. Start thinking about what does that mean? What is a sovereign? Who do you actually owe your allegiance to? And I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but it feels like that's also what he's doing there. He's saying, like, listen, you guys can keep kind of watching your Canadian government do the shit that it's doing and saying that you're Canadians, but you could also just be something else if you kind of are sick of this shit.
You know, I want to put one idea out into the ether because, you know, we were talking about the trade lines, the U.S. having protection on one side, Russia having protection on the other, and the global regime being denied access to that entire area. I'm just throwing this out because I'm totally interested in learning more about it. I think it's fascinating, and I think you might too. But there are people in the world who believe that Mount Zion is actually at the North Pole, which would suggest that Zionism as a practice might have been inverted, or Zionism as an ideology may have been inverted in our understanding. And I really find that to be a fascinating aspect of this that I think we might get more information about in the future. But something you touched on there that's really important is to understand that we have been indoctrinated in belief systems of the quote unquote, the West, which is just really the global regime. That is what they're describing when they mean the West. We're talking about like our history in these certain places. They are primarily talking about the history of the global regime. The maps that they draw are not correct, right? The fake news is future history. Fake news didn't start today. Fake news has been going on for a long time. Apply that to science, and what do we have? Exactly the science we think we have now. You know, apply that to religion. We have distorted religions. Apply that to our maps. We have distorted maps. And a lot of the geography-based shifts that we see are only geography-based shifts in our minds because of how the regime drew the maps and kind of had the UN to give them their legitimacy. And, you know, you can kind of probe these issues in various countries around the world, have a conversation with an AI or spend some time doing deep research.
Or if you're alpha, you can copy and paste what an AI tells you and represent it as your opinions in a private conversation. What the fuck, alpha?
That was so ridiculous.
Weirdest fucking Fed move you've made in days.
But if you ask for what the legitimacy of the lines on the maps are, it'll tell you that it's that the community of nations and the UN agree that that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a very strange standard because it can be real in our minds, but if the nations with more people and more power agree that it's a different way, they probably don't care what we think about where the line on the map 9,000 miles away is.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it's kind of silly, but having married a Canadian, I've dealt with border crossings more than a lot of people. I know a lot of people on the southern border have dealt with this, maybe for business, if you've gone into Mexico. But I've driven back and forth, I've flown back and forth the Canadian border, I mean, I don't know, 50 plus times easily.
Wow.
If not more than that. And it is it hits people, I think, that think about these things like this community does. When we look at the lines on a map, it sort of strikes you when you're dealing with borders like that. Like you're driving along and then you get to this toll booth and this either very kind or very butthurt guard is the one who deems you the right to enter or not. Like one of the things that was a strange learning for me, this was before MAGA, etc., back 2012, 13, when I was first going up there a lot, is that a border guard can simply bar you entry. There is no like, I mean, according to the rules of the game board they've set out, there's no like, oh, my rights, if you're a visitor. I mean, they can just say, your face is kind of stupid. I generally don't like the vibe that you exude. Go home. You're never coming back. They can put like a 10-year ban on you. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, that you should be able to do that to somebody who's not a citizen of your country. But it struck me as just far more arbitrary than the illusion of these lines on the maps. And there must be all these really intricate systems that go into designing the rules around who comes and goes. And I'm not talking about swimming across a river in New Mexico. It's like I'm driving to Canada, and to find out that just that guy or girl could be like, go home, I don't like you, without citing anything was interesting. But then alternatively, during COVID, I remember going up there with my wife to visit her family, and we were unvaccinated. And that was interesting because they're kind of bound by the other rules of the game, where they sort of interrogated us on one of these trips for a while about like our vaccination status and, you know, you can't come in here or whatever. Turns out, yeah, you can. And there's nothing that they can do to stop you from that. But it was so interesting watching the exchange almost between the enforcers of this border, where like one of them is saying, well, surely I'm watching the same CNN and CBC coverage that everybody else is while people are coming across the border. I've got it in my little toll booth, and it says that she can't come into her country. And then when the commanding officer just informs them, like, actually, there's literally nothing to be done here. There's literally nothing you can do. She can go home. She can do whatever the fuck she wants. Like, and that's Canada. That's not even here. So I guess it's just this exercise in it's like whoever you come across in a position of perceived authority, is your rights are rebalancing depending on who you're interacting with a lot of the times.
Well, yeah, and that's a crucial thing to understand, right? The Constitution is meant to be the law of the land. Now, the Constitution has been wholly inverted. We're in a post-constitutional period, and that upsets people. You know, the goal should be to get back to the original Constitution. And then if we need to keep going, let's keep going. But according to the Constitution and the thought of the period, that was meant to protect your rights. And if something was passed that was in overt opposition to the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, then it was null and void from before its passage, and the people passing it should be thought of as treasonous because they were violating the rule, the one thing that everybody agreed to follow. And they were doing it in a position of public trust. Like, that is a violation of the public trust. That's the sort of thing that should be impeachable, that should be considered treason, so that people actually do the job they're sent there to do. But the thing is, they also believed, and this is still true, and it has to be true, that the people are delegating the rights to the state and they're delegating the rights to the federal government. And because they're delegating, the people are the ultimate authority, which means they have the ability to rescind those rights at all times. Congress should not be passing any legislation that the people don't obviously want in a substantial majority. They shouldn't be fighting over legislation to get it passed because they need to do this to save everybody. That's not how it works. That can be done in the states. And no, we don't need all the states to do the same thing. That's insane. And so if the people want to override a Supreme Court decision by disbanding the court, that's well within the people's rights to do. And we don't even understand things that way anymore because we're statists now. We believe that the state is an authority higher than us, and we are subjects of that state, and they protect us, and we get to follow the state's laws. And all of this stuff is exactly the outcome that they anticipated in the Civil War. And I don't need to keep going on about this. We can continue the discussion. It's no problem for me. but I did a long
this is
episode
part
on
of-
this
is
on
part of what I
Monday.
wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, George P. Fletcher, he's this constitutional law attorney and professor who was at Columbia University, one of the most communist universities in the country, globalist, regime-oriented universities in the country. Fletcher is a Zionist, okay? He talks about it explicitly in the book. I don't even think he's Jewish, but he is a Zionist. I believe he said his wife is Jewish or something. But seriously, I'm just making sure that people know where this perspective is coming from, right? It's not a MAGA perspective I'm about to describe. He argues that the Civil War was good and that Abraham Lincoln was the nation's greatest hero for fighting the Civil War because it literally overthrew our Constitution and replaced it with what he calls our secret Constitution, hence the title of the book. They replaced the republic with a democracy, a focus on the sovereign individual. They shifted that to the good of the state, and they went from a model that valued liberty to a model that valued equality. And it is explicit in the book that he believes all of these are good things. This led to the Reconstruction Amendments. The 14th Amendment in particular, with the Equal Treatment Clause, allows the federal government to monitor all business and all personal interactions across all of society to make sure that no one's starting slavery again, except they never stopped slavery. They've had it going the entire time, and it's still going right now. It is the same regime the entire time. And you can see them doing the same thing right now and setting up to do it with all of the foreign slaves they're importing now to exploit for their political power and their labor. And if need be, they would conscript them into an army and turn them against the dissenters in this country. So it would be the supporters of the regime, probably mostly people they would have to pay off quite a bit to go against their neighbors as far as Americans are concerned, and then conscripted foreign slaves and, whatever they have left of the UN and NATO and whatever quote unquote allies are out there.
NATO boots on the ground. Don't forget about those.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking about the chart you pulled up earlier, the political distribution.
Yeah.
And it strikes me to think of the founding fathers / there, and think, another way of putting that would be, the founding fathers who won, right? We've talked about this a bit lately.
Well, the founding fathers who won would be on the left side with the rest of them.
Yeah. So I guess that's meant to represent the other founding fathers.
They wanted a sprawling, centralized federal government that would be working in league with the global regime. And
exactly.
And people can I guess there are, ways to get after that subject, right? Was it an absolute fundamental necessity of that day that to be able to profit from trade, for instance, certain concessions had to be made? Well, maybe that's true. Okay. But I think at this point, we've got enough understanding to know that the global regime is in fact the enemy, and you cannot compromise with that enemy, especially not in search of short-term comfort or benefit. And as you go on down the line, you can see that the system that ultimately was put in place, that they pushed through the ratification on people who did not want it. And that's, by the way, replacing the Articles of Confederation that themselves needed 13 out of 13 states to ratify. Any changes, by the way, any changes to the Articles had to be ratified by 13 states. They had a meeting to consider changes. And at that meeting, it was just, you know what, we're going to write a whole new thing, and it's only going to take 9 states to ratify it. Yeah. And oh, by the way, the 14th Amendment, not ratified, not legitimately ratified ever. So our entire body of civil law essentially is based on the 14th Amendment and the precedent that followed. All of that is null and void. in a real way, and the people can simply make it so by acknowledging it, but people refuse to because they are called racist for questioning the central narrative, the official story on the Civil War.
Well, that's why I think it's been interesting to talk to you a lot lately about a lot of your reading has been based in the past around that time period. Obviously, it's important, but I think it's important in ways that you don't think about until you start applying this sovereignty versus statism idea, which is really the theme that I wanted to get your thoughts on tonight, because it is something that we've been thinking about and that we need to be thinking about. It's the most future-minded discussion that I think you can have that recalls the discussions, the arguments that were happening during that founding era of this country. And, I think some people get uncomfortable with it because it's almost like they think, oh, isn't this good enough? Like we're winning, we won the fake election, etc. And it's not meant to be, in my mind, a cynical or nihilistic negative take. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think that if we're sitting here talking about redefining American sovereignty, redefining our relationship, if there is one, with statism and centralized government in the future, then that argument taking place implies that we are entering or are in the middle of a period of great change that makes such a conversation possible, right? Like you could have this conversation 30 years ago, but there wasn't really massive political, socio-political, psychological changes going on worldwide that looked like it was opening a pathway to redefine this stuff or to go back to some of these original Articles of Confederation ideals, original constitutional ideals. But the fact that we've got Trump and we've got, more importantly, what he represents and this movement of people, kind of this resurgent Americanism, these conversations are starting up again. So I think arguing about them and trying to really be specific about what we want to define new American sovereignty as, or new human sovereignty as, maybe that's decentralization we can talk about. That's actually an optimistic framing, in my view, that people get uncomfortable with, because it's saying, hey, we're saying like the ground is fertile. The game board is breaking apart and reshuffling. And yeah, there's probably patriot plans. There's probably plans that oppose them. But you don't have to just sit on the sidelines and kind of wait for the puzzle pieces to be fit into place for you to then observe. You get to be an active participant in the discussions around how those puzzle pieces should be put back and what we want to go forward into. The reason I made that point about the Founding Fathers, which, then it's great to hear when you talk about the 9 out of 13 versus 13 out of 13. We use the term Founding Fathers so much in like the MAGA right-wing, quote unquote, world that we've relegated it we've crystallized it into this monolith that is not an accurate representation. And we're going to learn a lot more when you revisit the arguments of that day, because they're probably going to be the arguments that if everything goes well, keeps going well and keeps going kind of in our direction overall, those are going to be the arguments that we're going to be having in the years ahead, which are going to be better arguments than, hey, should we have globalism or not, right? Like, or should trannies be teaching your kids? Like, those are the training wheels arguments, but the arguments we want to be having and that we have these discussions for are the ones that the Adams brothers were having. It's the reason that at the time the Bostonians were very based and a lot of the other colonies were like, these guys are fucking crazy, get them out of here. They're doing all this shit to the empire. And then you had your statists. And many of those, to your point, continued on. And there were many of the... I bet you that there were many of the original based Founding Fathers who probably regretted just how much they did capitulate to the unity messaging of their day, because I'm sure some of them did that.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I think that the People's Revolution probably got hijacked as they do. And, it's strange that this is like the one revolution that we are certain wasn't started by the global regime.
Right.
And Of course it was, because elements of it were like funding it, So we have to look back at all of this stuff, I believe. Gosh, you were saying something there. I just went off track. What were you?
I said the founding fathers probably were dealing with their own unity psyops at the time, like the ones who were opposing the ratification,
right,
convention, etc.
Yeah, I think I kind of lost my thought a little bit, but the decentralization was what I wanted to talk about. So there are different ways to think about that, right? So if we took the federal government right now and brought it back, scaled it down, and this is the only constitutional thing it should be, by the way. Like it needs to go away in almost complete way. I don't know if you want to put this up. I just pulled this up on Perplexity really quick. But just, the purpose is, what was the original limited purpose of the federal government in America before the Constitution? Conduct diplomacy and make war, coin money and direct the post office, set weights and measures, act as the final arbiter of disputes between states.
Yeah, it was a referee. It's like a glorified referee.
And so what it would do to defend the country is call together and centrally direct the militias of each state, which were run by the governor of that state, and it accounted for all the people who were expected to train themselves in using weapons and being able to fight and showing up so that they could be part of a thing. It probably created a lot of cohesion among communities and trust among neighbors. And, it says right here, it lacked enforcement powers. It couldn't regulate commerce. It couldn't print money. It had no power to levy. Well, wait a second. It can coin money. I don't know what that means. If those things are, somebody's going to have to get down to the details, because this is the flip between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. No power to levy taxes, relying on voluntary contributions from states and voluntary contributions from people, because they have no actual ability to tax you either. It required unanimous consent from all the states for any major decisions. That's an entirely different model. And we're told that it's the same. But the federal government just keeps expanding until it controls everything. And of course, now the sprawling federal bureaucracy is working in public-private partnership with all of these different corporations, some of them transnational, to implement a singular agenda and make the trains run on time worldwide. And that's not the intended purpose. So if we go back to that intended purpose, that is already one step of decentralization, because all of the more ground level control has been dropped one layer onto the states, which is one layer closer to the people. And then it should go down from there. But at least we begin to get toward manageable pockets, right? So that's the first thing. Now, the other thing that is an important topic of conversation that people completely ignore when they're going off about how cool sovereignty is that we have two books that I want to focus on. One being The Sovereign Individual. Now, I have not finished this book, but I have a very clear picture of what they're describing and where they're going and what the impact of that book has had. And I think I've read a third of it, so I'm familiar with the writer's perspective, I believe. And their perspective is that history is true and science is true, which is already a problem. But then we move on a few years later and we get to Curtis Yarvin, who goes by Mencius Moldbug. He is like the godfather of neo-reactionaries, or the neo-reaction, as they sometimes call it. Nick Land was later on, and I think Nick Land has kind of taken a bit of a different direction. But he, too, believes that history and science are, like, as far as the canon says, those are accurate. That's how we have to understand the world. He is an atheist, a scientific materialist. He went to Brown University. His grandfather was a communist who he believes helped defeat the Nazis. And, of course, he believes all of that history as written as well. And so his beliefs are informed by these ideologies. Now, he's a very entertaining writer. I think he's got he's got a lot of really good ideas. And this isn't me doing a full critique of his, because I've read like one book. Okay. And he's got a whole, I don't know, he's got 8 or 9 books, and I'm trying to tear through them, but I'm dealing with a lot of things, But Nick Land describes what Yarvin has pictured throughout that writing in what they call a patchwork. And they talk about these kind of disparate sovereign city-states that basically operate on their own terms within that city-state and are governed by, they call it a trichotomy. I'll find the word, but it's a 3-part government. No, they have slightly different balance of power than we are told that we have here. And it's very logical, very rational. It all makes a hell of a lot of sense. But I'm not sure that gets brought into reality. And I'm not sure that gets brought into reality the way that the crazed promoters of this tech utopia believe it's going to be. You can't just cheer for sovereignty and then the world blooms anew. We are all just suddenly sovereign and everything around us looks exactly the same. That is not the same world.
You're wrong, actually. Donald Trump literally said that he's returning power to the people. So what he's going to do after inauguration is go to the mountaintop, I believe in Utah, that's where the best ones are, and bring tablets down of sovereignty and give them back to us, the people, and we will be sovereign again.
I think that's where Zion is, actually.
Right. Maybe it's in Greenland.
I'll tell you.
This is the full op.
Well, it's very close to Greenland. I'll tell you what, though. I believe that Donald Trump may have given power back to the people at that point, and the rest of this is him just showing us what that means over time. Because, the military comes out in his inauguration, and devolution basically requires that we've been under some form of military government. All you have to do is suggest that it's been that way for a little longer, and the executive orders and whatnot that were filed at the end of that Trump term were kind of to help us and guide us along this path. But in that circumstance, if they have already given power back to the people, then it really is up to the people to accept that and take it and understand what that responsibility means and what it requires. And that requires us really understanding a whole lot about what our government is supposed to be, what government in general is supposed to be, what has been done to us, what has been done in our names. And if we're not going to spend our time figuring those things out and figuring out what the money is and how these things work in a big way, then, the time that we're spending figuring out who the Cybertruck bombers' cousins, like high school girlfriend is, it just doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. Nothing has come from that op, and people spent countless hours on it. I mean, if we come to find out in a few months that elections are totally fake, completely and totally fake, that the 2024 election was only for show because people refused to get it for 4 years after 2020, what does it mean that people spent hundreds of thousands of collective man hours and all the time and all the emotional energy going out and doing all the Charlie Kirk and Scott Pressler stuff? It means nothing. It was a total waste of time. And people don't like hearing that stuff because they want to know that there's something effective they can do. There is something effective you can do. It's just not that. All you have to do is not comply. You exit from that system.
That's what we have to clip. I got to get back to clipping, or asking other people to clip because I don't know how to do it. That's well said. I think one of the terms that I use about Trump is sort of, we talk about layers. We talk about the war of stories. I mean, narrative warfare, translation layers, and I like the way you frame that because it allows for that. It's sort of all of this period of time. One of my favorite refrains that's repeated in the Q drops, I think you can just apply it to so many different macros, is the choice to know will be yours. And it's kind of this cute little phrase, and I know it's got the connotation of it is sort of clandestine operations, and this is super secret intelligence that we, the ghost in the machine, are giving to you, the people. And that's fine. That's a fine interpretation, but that's not really what I was struck by with that refrain. I often think of it similarly to how you frame even that ceremony, or the statements Trump's making of we're returning power back to the people. Even, I don't remember if we were on a show or if you just said this in a private chat, but talking about the sort of reward for the awakening is its own reward. I've said that in the past, but one of the ways that you've put it is the alternative is also true. The people who are engaging and spending all this time trying to, as you always put it, understand the details of a complete and utter fiction. I love the way you put that, because it really does assign like a ridiculous, like nihilistic, temporal element to that pursuit. Just that pursuit in frivolity of the mind, of just going down these rabbit holes that by definition can't lead you anywhere productive, even if the thing ends up being real, such as the Cybertruck event. If you learn all of the details of the real thing, you're no further than where you started by just skimming the headline, looking at the picture of the thing, and moving beyond it. And in fact, you're beyond that. We did an episode of Story Hour a few months ago on Edge of Tomorrow, or Live, Die, Repeat, whatever it's called these days. And we were talking about the sand bunkers and the idea that, if you get stuck in these sand bunkers, that's kind of how I see the detail rabbit trails, where you're like, all right, well, maybe that's a real sand bunker that you're in, but you're still in the sand bunker. Like, you spend enough time in there, you're not going to get further down the beach by learning all the details of that specific deployment. So I think that's why it behooves people, whether you think it's real or fake, to step back and be like, look at the whole beach. Where does your time get you if you spend your time trying to think about this, rather than the bigger picture ideas like sovereignty? I want to kick this back to you. One thing that you teed me up with a lot of the sovereignty and statism discussion, I'd found this before the show, and I wasn't expecting to be struck by it, but man, it struck me. Just looking I was like, what are the official definitions of sovereignty? I didn't expect. Go ahead.
Can we take 1 second just to cap off? I want to add one thing to what I was saying prior. Curtis Yarvin is an important figure, not only because he's a compelling writer and very interesting. And I don't hate this guy. I'm not saying I hate this guy. I'm saying that this philosophy, he's very close to Peter Thiel and very close to J.D. Vance. So those things matter. These are people who are, and all those tech bros who now say nice things about Donald Trump, but were just on the Build Back Better agenda 4 years ago. They're still on the Build Back Better agenda. This is what the Build Back Better agenda looks like. Okay. Like, them liking Trump while they're pushing through the technocratic agenda, that's not what we signed up for. It's important to understand their proximity to a guy like Curtis Yarvin and to the ideas they want. Now, maybe that's the best thing, and maybe that's where everyone wants to go. It's certainly not going to be my decisions on what guides this, but I think that there's a way to still have a nation, and I do not trust the technocracy at all. And it, to be perfectly honest, really worries me that people don't worry more about these people. We do not need the rest of the world plan for us. They have a plan. They still believe that they are roughly on course, and they are, to the extent that if they are able to capture everybody's belief and get everybody back on the same page at the same time, when that convergence moment happens, it shoots off in their direction. Which is just
like
another
Facebook
reason why
is cool now, and
so what happens?
Aspects of it.
What happens if they restore Facebook to some sort of prominence, or along with Twitter, the new totally free speech Twitter that isn't free speech at all, and all the everybody in the truth movement, they kind of get like tired, they want to relax and just watch Fox for the catch up instead of dig in alternative news. That's exactly how we get back there. It's to want the machine back. And it really is easy, man. And to trust that scientific materialists who say that they've decided that it's okay to lie to the entire world on a massive scale in order to wake you up so that you can be dog walked into their new system thinking it's wonderful. I don't know who wants that, but apparently people do. The scientific materialism at the very bottom, that is the base layer ideology of the regime. This world here is all that matters. We must become masters of this world. And no matter what we have to do, all of that's just fine because, morality is obsolete.
Yeah, well said. I recently was talking about this in the context of Canadians. I know I've made a lot of them angry these days, but it makes me think, my wife and I had lived there when we were dating for a while. Obviously, she grew up there. And I've said this publicly and privately that one of the things I was really struck by with conversations with Canadians I knew, especially during COVID, it happened in the U.S. too, for sure. But there was a little bit of a different flavor to disagreements with Canadians that I knew and whose opinions I respected on just general whatever. Guy up there that I was friends with, still am friends with him, but that I would have expected, like, point out a based Canadian. I'd say, well, that guy, that's a dude I could have some whiskey by the fire with, and we could talk about this kind of stuff and doesn't hurt his feelings, etc. It was that during COVID, they weren't so much shocked at a moralist choice or a rights choice that somebody like me would make. It didn't shock them that I didn't take the vaccine. It did, however, shock them that I wasn't worried about the government. And it struck me that my wife has said this many times, that it's like Canada, I know this isn't unique, a lot of people have said this, but Canada was like the experiment of if the statists win, not just on an actual level of controlling the government, but on a subversive level of reprogramming the minds of Western people to think in the way you said quite a while ago of that sort of top-down governmental idea that, centralization, you've got the rights come from the government, the rights come from authority, rather than springing up from the people and being assigned to the government. It's like Canada was this experiment of, can we just win the story of representing ourselves on the world stage as a Western democracy while we are practicing as anything but, and again, I know that the U.S. is not one to talk, but it didn't go as far, it hasn't gone as far as it's gone in places like that, where they're just like, yep, what the government says you do, like being a good citizen on some level to a lot of Canadians is doing what the government says. And like, drats, we've currently got a government we don't like, let's do what they say until we get one that maybe we like a little bit better, and on we go. But, when you're talking about visions of the future, I think that's the globalist ideal. It's like they don't want this hellscape. The new globalists, or the ones that would be most likely to win, they probably wouldn't have us operating in this obvious hellscape of communism and I don't know, low quality of living, etc. It would probably be more something like Canada, where it's like, yeah, you own a lot less than you used to. You really don't own anything, but you can get by. Like, you play by the rules and you understand the structure the way we want you to, which is that you don't have any inherent rights. You get those from us, just like you get a library card. You get your I am a Canadian card from the government. And that's certainly what they've been trying to do in the U.S., of just sort of commoditize this idea of like national identity is divorced now from a value-based representation to a legal distinction. That's more what it is now, and that's what the tech bros you talk about, they would want they sort of think, I guess, kind of think of things in the same way, where they want a more perfect government, right? Like, they don't want to get rid of the government. They want to run it because they're way smarter than the current government, and you should bow down to them instead.
Well, it also makes it way easier for them to do the things that they want to do, and they describe themselves as libertarian. They all make themselves sound very based and red-pilled. But when it comes down to it, they just have the same interests they always had, and they were happy to have the uniparty and the global regime serving those interests, and they'll be happy to have the uniparty government with Donald Trump at the head serving their interests. I want to say quickly, trichotomy is the word I was looking for. I think I said it, but that's
John said
definitely what it
vasectomy.
is.
Pretty close.
Very close. Thiel actually wrote the foreword of The Sovereign Individual in the last edition printed. Yep. And I just want to say the Yarvin I was reading was from like the Obama era. So it has been some time. His views might have changed. And I don't mean to misrepresent the man in any way. I am telling you what I have observed, what I have read between him and I've read Land more extensively. So
Yarvin is crying himself to sleep as we speak.
Well, I want to be sure that, you know, these are important things that I think are going to come up in the future. And I don't want to I want to make sure that I'm not misleading anybody about what these people think, because I think it's important to understand. I think it's also important to engage with their ideas rather than classifying them as good or evil. He's put something out here. Does this work? Is this what we want? Now, if you believe that history is true and science is true, then I believe that is the same thing as believing the fake news is true. And it turns out that we have a lot of people in our community that still believe the fake news is true. There was a lot of fake news about that fire that everybody just went with because it is useful for totally poning the Democrats. You know, the fire hydrants, the purse flinging water over the wall. All of that is probably false or definitely false, but none of it matters because we're not trying to defeat the Democrats.
Right.
The Uniparty right now is trying to replace Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, and they are shoving to the fore Rick Caruso so that everyone will be like, oh, he's the hero. He's going to fix that DEI problem. Well, maybe, but he also locked people down and encouraged masks and vaccines. He's also profiting massively from what's happening right now. And his first job in politics was being on the LA, the commission of the Department of Water and Power.
Yeah, you know, it's last week I was saying his name wrong constantly, but Pierre Poilievre is somebody to watch in Canada when you mentioned like the Ron op earlier. You know, people get butthurt about it, and it doesn't mean we're right. I mean, for our suspicions of people, but the suspicions themselves are well-founded. I think something a lot of quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, which everybody watching this show, you've been called that, or you've called yourself that. One thing I think, have all run into is conversations with normies. I've run into this with my mom, I remember, when I was trying to red pill her on Epstein Island and all that good shit, like 4 years ago. Well, geez, long now. 8 years ago? My God. You hit some people and they're like, I don't believe what you're saying, etc. But then you hit other people, and I think there's actually a sizable portion of people that you hit that are like, I don't want to believe that something that bad is going on. And that's what I hit with my mom. It wasn't so much a logic filter or a logic wall that I hit, which is what I hit with a lot of other people. It was an emotion wall of, if I accept that this is possible, say, systemic child trafficking among wealthy people in the world, right, and governments, which we all know what goes on. Your mileage may vary on which ops you think are true and which are not. But that goes on. It's been going on forever. Donald Trump talks about it. Ancient practice. It goes on. People you'll hit will have this emotional dissonance wall of saying, if I allow that is true, I then have to do a lot of psycho-spiritual work to re-engage with my reality, and I don't like how that makes me feel if I don't do all of that work. So you can see the choice made in people's minds to stay in their version of the Matrix, or the false reality, as you call it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that there's what you're pointing out about sort of the wildfire. Pick your narrative. Pierre Poilievre, maybe he's an ultra-base Canadian. I don't know. I just know the video of him.
DeSantis.
Yeah, I just know the video of him chewing an apple sardonically that came out a couple of years ago was the gayest thing I've seen ever from a liberal, from a from anybody. Like it was bad. It was hard to watch. And at the time, I'm like, okay, so here's the regime build a Trump. Like, this is the Canadian Trump. Now, maybe he is the Canadian Trump. He's doing all the rounds on alternative media. The reason I brought up my mom and the trafficking and all that is to say, if you find yourself hitting an emotional dissonance wall like that, where just the act of questioning a character like a Poilievre that you like, make sure that if you like the guy, you like him because you vetted him a lot more than Chris or I have vetted him, and you've thought about all of these things, and you've come to a totally different conclusion about it, and that's fine. You have that, I can have a different one. Make sure it's not because you really, really want this to be the Canadian Donald Trump. It's like, it's a very simple distinction, but I think it's one that people fall into, just being like, man, wouldn't it be so great if this was the case? Well, yes, but as many conspiracy theorists have probably said to normies, the reason that they are able to get away with these things is because your reaction is immediate disbelief that they could or that they would. So the goalposts have shifted. I think the positive way of looking at all of this is that I've said before, if they're in a position where they're creating Build a MAGA candidates, that's dangerous and something we need to track. It is, however, I think, a very positive development because it shows you their goalposts moving of being like, shit, we've lost the democracy narrative. We've lost the globalist narrative. Now we have to put on like the skin suit of we are nationalists, we're sovereign, we're all about MAGA and America first. It doesn't mean the threat has passed, but it does mean that the threat has been forced to transform itself and disguise itself in a different manner.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important. I think we've actually talked about this a bit on Badlands Story Hour before. The skin suit thing really does matter because you can see that the effort is to. So I believe that Pierre Poilievre is the Canadian Ron DeSantis, and I believe that Ron DeSantis was created to be a Trump light. You know, we had all different versions of Trump light. We're going to hear all the establishment, the regime's establishment agenda, kind of rewritten by a MAGA writer. You know,
right?
Not a real MAGA writer though, like one of those people
like
that
a James Lindsay.
No, yeah, exactly, or like Tim Pool or like Megyn Kelly would be the person to tell everybody what we think, despite not knowing us at all. All of that is geared toward forcing their part of the controlled opposition dynamic, right, from inside the thing to intermingle with our thing and make it indistinguishable on some levels. And once that happens, as they move into the next phase, what you'll see is the establishment element pull back and then blame us for all of the bad things, right? We'll be the racists, just like the television describes, and the sexists and the homophobes. We're stupid again. You know, they'll run down the list of things that we did wrong that they had nothing to do with. And now that they have assumed the role of us, they'll be the true carriers of the America First agenda out into the future. And we will be the Nazis. Right. You know, they'll be the polite society that just keeps going on and becomes American neoconservatives again, like they did the first time. And we will be left with the tag of having done everything wrong, despite not having done any of the things.
It's you know, this may seem like a strange aside, but it's okay to be gay. I would open with this. But ... You can't just do a little bit of gay stuff and not be gay, right? Like, if you do a little butt stuff with the boys, you're gay. If you go a little bit Ron, you're going Ron. And if you go a little bit retard, you go right, never go full retard. There's a clip that encapsulates what I think is going on here with the Polyev ops and the DeSantis ops and the James Lindsays, etc. This is pretty much, I think, what's going on in MAGA. And Chris and I represent iced tea in this clip here. I believe it's, I don't know if it's past tense iced tea or ice tea. The kids can tell me, the 52-year-old kids who grew up on iced tea. But anyway, we represent him in this scene. This other gentleman represents Con Inc., your James Lindsays of the world.
Man, I am not gay. I have relationships with women and sex with men.
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
That is one of my all-time favorite clips because it's real and it was played straight, ironically enough, in some sort of procedural show that Ice-T is on. But yeah, I mean, that's just how I would sum up what you said in a much more immature way. Like, you can't... This is what Chris did when he was destroying all of these people on Twitter and chased James Lindsay off of True Social, I believe, in about 48 hours. Like, he hasn't been around there. That was quick. Now he's trying to take you sound vaccinated, which I've said. I've put out the call before. Don't let it happen, people. If there's one thing we cannot surrender. Yeah, but, you know, just it really made me think of that scene. It was just like the goalposts moving that they do, where they want to be the adults in the room version of MAGA. It's kind of like just being the gay version. And, you know, if you just say it's gay, it's okay if you're gay. But you're damn well not going to do a bunch of gay stuff and tell me you're not gay. It's just not allowed.
This conversation took quite a turn. The thing to do with these people on Twitter, and I don't know why people don't do it, and I think it's because of the respect they have for them in the abstract power hierarchy over on Twitter. You know, people think that, like, if I say something to this big account and they say something back to me, everybody's going to attack me and that's going to feel bad. Well, yeah, it will. But why do you care? Okay. Why do you care? Are these people lying? Yes, they are. Tell them exactly how they're lying. Undercut them with something, like, come at them from the side they're trying to, like, puff themselves up about. You know, come at them from the right. Come at them, like, with you sound vaccinated. Oh, you're going to tell me that you're smarter than me? I'm a conspiracy theorist? You told people to wear masks, Mike Cernovich. Like,
literally gay too. Yeah, it's kind of funny.
that matters, right? Like, we don't have to see these people as better in any way. They're not better in any way. They've been wrong at every single turn where we've been right over the last 5 years. That's every issue that mattered. We were months or years ahead. And I don't mean you and me or me and Badlands. I mean, like, hardcore, not even just hardcore Trump supporters, but people who are really trying to get in tune with this thing and see what happens. Go ahead.
Which is why I use the term sovereign again. One thing I was going to bring up earlier that it kind of gels with something you were talking about then is, you're talking about the definitions of sovereignty. That's kind of what I was interested in talking about. We've talked about that a lot tonight, and sovereignty versus statism, etc., decentralization. But I was struck by looking up the definition of sovereignty, because I'm like, okay, I know how I think about it, and I certainly know how you think about it, but what is the official definition? And man, if the definitions, plural rather, say anything, it's an uncanny representation of a lot of what you've talked about tonight, especially when you're talking about the Founding Fathers, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, these arguments that have been going on forever about the centralization of power versus essentially the decentralization of sovereign power. And it's basically baked into the definitions. I think what we're seeing here, I'm going to pull up Merriam-Webster Merriam-Webster. I think what we're seeing here in the official definitions is actually a disclosure of the war of the stories, the two stories of sovereignty. So listen to this, the definitions of sovereignty. 1, supreme power, especially over a body politic. B, freedom from external control, autonomy. And I'm like, that struck me. I know it might sound a little silly, but those are basically opposite definitions in my mind. I guess technically speaking, wielding power over a body politic, wielding power over a group, you are wielding sovereignty over it. If the American people control their government. But I think that the way globalists, the way centralists, collectivists rather, have been putting together the story of their democracy, which we hear them talk about all the time, right? Like our democracy is a story. They're trying to reframe sovereignty as precisely that, as if you've got power over a body politic, that is sovereignty. If you have power over the United States government, over the Congress, over its people, I think it's been inverted in that definition. If you have power over the American people, the body politic of the American people, you are a sovereign state. And then the second definition is more what we would be thinking of. Freedom from external control, autonomy. Those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. Like to me, wielding power over something is not the same thing as having power apart from it. Having power to separate oneself from it. And I feel like that's long been the dance. This kind of dichotomy, I guess, or paradox at the heart of sovereignty versus a sovereign nation, I think it was at the heart of the founding arguments, and I think it's going to be at the heart of things going forward. And I'm really interested to just hear, whether you do see a distinction there between sovereign nation and sovereign individual, or between those two definitions, or do you think they're more aligned than I do?
I probably think they're more aligned, but that's because in the first case, I kind of take that as like the ruler of a nation, like a king, right? He would be the sovereign over that. The king of France is the sovereign of France. Yeah. And then France would have sovereignty insofar as it has autonomy relative to other nations. And so I think that that's more in line with the second definition. So I don't think that you have to necessarily try to reconcile those. Yeah. It's funny in the Yarvin picture of how the world might look. He talks about essentially a monarch in each one of these kind of corporate city-states. And the monarch would be not necessarily hereditary, although I think he leaves the potential for that, but it would basically be about a centralized kind of command authority, the same way that they set up the president in the United States of America. I was listening to this Path to Liberty podcast by the 10th Amendment Center, and I would strongly recommend that podcast to absolutely everybody. I think it is absolutely crucial information at this point in the kind of progression of the country. He was talking about how George Washington was a firm believer that we should have no alliances with foreign nations. None. Not like foreign treaties that form multilateral alliances. Not we are allies with these nations and will come to their defense at any time if they are attacked. And not we must protect this state the regime made up 75 years ago across the world because they are our greatest ally, despite not being our greatest ally, except to the extent that they are actually our government. And I don't mean that they are corrupting our politicians. I mean that there is actually a level of government above national governments, and we kind of see the public-facing aspect of it in the World Economic Forum of the United Nations. But you can go back through history, and this was throughout the transfer agreement. There are different global congresses, actual global governments, and they're all different branches of Zionism, by the way, back then, who are using the media the finance and whatever control they have of the militaries to influence world events. And the author of the transfer agreement, who is a Zionist and a Jew and very proud of the transfer agreement, which, by the way, was an agreement between Zionists and Nazis to confiscate the property of European Jews and then transport them down to Palestine to set up the regime proxy state of Israel. They had an agreement, and throughout the book, you see a Zionist Jew in this book that has been heavily awarded, published in 3 editions. He talks about this relationship, the negotiations that settled on this particular relationship, and the battles not only between the Zionist Congresses with one another, but then the ways that they would leverage governments, including our own, to get on board with what they wanted. Like, for instance, boycotting everything coming out of Germany so that the economy dies. And then the Zionists, of course, save the economy of Germany. And the economy is poor, so therefore they're going to convince the Germans that they must go along with this program in order to keep their economy going. And by the end of the book, it's very clear that the story that has been told about that since then is a story of controlled opposition, because they were absolutely, irrefutably business partners, and then went down to Israel and started the paramilitaries, and not too far away, the Muslim Brotherhood. And here we go.
Man, when you put it like that. Yeah, the reason I get what you're saying with the sovereign leader and everything. I think that makes sense. I think the reason I'm thinking about it from the perspective of what would be the ideal, like press a button, press the magic button. What's the ideal sovereign world? Can you have sovereign nations in a world with sovereign individuals? That's kind of what I've been thinking about a lot lately, to avoid the parameters, or to avoid an environment that could create the conditions, or in which the conditions for what you just described can be re-engineered, put back together. Is it possible to create a different world like that? A word I wrote down while you're talking about that is multipolarity, right? When you're talking about George Washington and treaties and transfer agreements, it's pretty interesting, because I'm not pretending it's perfect or anything, but it's so fascinating right now in the global story, where you've got the sort of like death rattle of the collectivist West, from sort of a public buy-in perspective, and the emergence of whether it's BRICS or this multipolar concept. Whether or not you agree that that's what these nation states like Russia and China, etc., are actually implementing, you can take that however you want. You know, they could be guiding us into their own version of the Great Reset. But the story that they are representing publicly seems to actually gel more in line with what you're talking about with George Washington. You know, this idea of, from a nation state perspective at least, forgetting the sovereign individual, but from a state perspective, they don't want treaties with other nations. That's often what BRICS is misrepresented as, when a lot of people I notice in our audience will mention, like, oh, the BRICS alliance. When we talk about BRICS quite a bit, BRICS isn't a treaty, though. It's different. It's actually, in a funny way, more aligned with NATO. But then when it comes to the EU and NATO, they're built on trying to put together all these treaties. I mean, Article 5 is the infamous retarded one that's like, hey, if you go to war with one of us, you go to war with all of us. Russia and China and these other nations in the emerging global south that they're kind of seem to be helping pry them away from the regime globalists. I know you talk about that a lot on your show.
Sure.
The story they're forwarding is multipolarity. It's basically mutually assured sovereignty that isn't coming on the back of codified legal agreements. It's coming on the back of cooperating, open communication, open proposal, and cooperation on things like trade routes, new construction, new financial rails. These aren't things where they're trying to get everybody on the new system. It's more like they're trying to get everybody off of the system and onto, hey, let's transact in ways that make sense, as needed, as makes sense. The same would apply to mutual defense, right? Like, hey, if there's somebody fucking around in our neck of the woods, then in Oceania, then it would behoove Japan and Australia to have conversations about what makes sense to do in accordance with what's best with their people. And I think the modern globalist system, they've given us the illusion of that. But to your point, and to George Washington's fears, they're not having conversations about what should be done. They're acting accordance with essentially coding of what must be done, whether or not it's what should be done.
Oh, yeah, of course. And that's the thing I think that is the most important to understand as far as I'm concerned, like the good twin, evil twin thing. You know, we still talk about like, oh, China's our worst enemy. What does that even mean? Doesn't mean anything. Right. Like China's not one thing, just like America's not one thing. You know, there's this that false reality layer of our government stacked on top of kind of the reality prime layer, which is the government that the people would actually support. And there's a separation there, and they have the administrative state. To the extent that they've had anything for the last 4 years, they have had the run of the administrative state with the funding from global philanthropists. But there's something else there as well. There are two distinct, there's the side that goes toward the centralization of the global regime, and there's the side that goes away from that. And that exists in China, that exists in Russia. It's obviously more prominent in Russia than it is here. It's more prominent in Venezuela, I think, than it is here. Many people are fully dependent on the regime and haven't even begun to figure out how to extract themselves from that system because they've been too worried about voting hard. And that is ultimately a real problem, because getting out of that is the point. We have to be heading in that direction. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's why I think there's so many layers to the brilliance of Trump's tariff deployments, not just from like a game theory, art of the deal, getting people to do what you want that's good for your people. But one of the things I've talked about a lot, specifically when it comes to China during COVID, is the idea that if Xi Jinping wants a sovereign China, which by extension means a more prosperous for its people China, then they need the U.S. to be less dependent on them, just as much as we need to be less dependent on them, because we're losing American jobs and American manufacturing through that parasitic globalist relationship. But the Chinese people are the slave labor that you talk about a lot, that by this Western oligarchy. So, this tariff trade war storyline between Trump and Xi, to me, it gives them both perfect cover to like cut the umbilical cord between their economies. And then if and when we transact, it's going to be in a way that makes perfect sense. You slap tariffs on things, there's still going to be Chinese imports into the country. They're just going to have to be better stuff, and they're going to have to compete with American manufacturing. And then what it's doing is it's going to make some of these multipolar nations levy the same on other nations, which it's the most common sense thing ever, that it's good for each nation when there's a barrier to entry into that market, if you're serving the market the right way.
I wanted to ask you something, and I also think maybe we should talk about kind of that convergence moment and how that looks in the tech sphere. I talked about that a bit this week on the show, and I think that's kind of one of the moments that we're potentially approaching. But also, we talked about how the regime wants to take countries down first in terms of destroying their economies, and when you separate from the regime, that's going to be the move: sanctions, economic warfare. And we talked a little bit about the collapse in 2020. I wonder, and it's occasionally a working theory, that we've been through that collapse already, and that was in 2020. And COVID and the fake election were cover stories over that entry point into not only the Great Reset, but potentially the way out of that as well. Because this thing is still kind of just chugging along, and it could go one way or the other. One group could be in control or the other one will. And all of these steps were required. The economy was going to crash no matter what. That was one of the elements that was a necessary feature of both sides' plans because it was going to happen. Like, they wrote down their plans. We know what their plans are. So we can write a plan that is better, that is responsive to that plan, and kind of adaptable enough over time that it can always be that. But their plan's there. And that's the one that's chugging along. And so I think of it and I talk about it like there's like these two bands, these two gangs in a Western film, right? Maybe it's black hats and white hats, not the same connotation, or two cowboy gangs, whatever it is. And they're a train's like charging down the tracks through a canyon, and down each side of the canyon is one of those gangs, and they're both going to rob that train. Well, what's going to happen is they're both going to get to the train. They're going to jump on it. And one of those gangs is going to shoot the other gang dead, and maybe some of them get away. And the gang that does that is now going to have control of the train as it moves forward. And so we have to make sure that we're those guys. And that is a factor only of belief.
Yeah, And that's especially when you talk about earlier in the show, the context of these characters who represent themselves as MAGA, and maybe some of them are, but these are the moments. I mean, as the train is accelerating or coming toward its climax, is when you've got to be the most vigilant for that, because to your point, that would be the prime opportunity to take it over. Where the most opportunistic thing to do would be to wait for one side to do all of the work and exhaust the manpower into taking the train over and getting control of it and starting to steer it in a certain direction. And then you attack and you take it over and you guide it the rest of the way, just into a different station than it intended. Kind of ironically, and I don't know maybe if this makes sense, but we talked about the skin suit sort of idea with MAGA. One of the things that I've talked about probably the most in the context of Trump and Xi, the US and China and COVID, is I think of that train analogy, not with the gangsters, but I've written about Operation Warp Speed. We've all talked about it in terms of acceleration, like accelerationism. Trump and patriots seem to like accelerationism. It doesn't seem to be good for the central narrative.
Also, with the US, also a feature of neo-reactionary thought. Continue.
Right. What I think is going on here, kind of what I said about the Supreme Court earlier, is a lot of the Patriot plans are doing that to the other side. They're essentially skin suiting enemy plans. I wrote an article like 3 years ago now, I think, or 2.5, called The Good Reset. And it was sort of like broad strokes, macro, what do I think the Patriot plan is? And it's kind of what you describe in an inverse of saying the Great Reset was on track, call it the 16-year plan, whatever you want to call it. And then Trump kind of comes in and it's like, he doesn't divert it, I think, from the tracks in the way that they thought he was going to. Like, I think they thought, like, he's going to just pull us right off the tracks. It's going to be, but they saw opportunity in that approach because they can represent everything he's doing as, look at all the destabilization. He's destroying the country. This is why I have a somewhat unpopular take on the COVID era. I don't think patriots did it to us, but I absolutely allow for that. They allowed it and liked that it happened, and that it was a Great Reset plan that probably was supposed to go way longer.
Yeah.
And that Trump pushed us straight into it. I mean, it's the age old and the Q drops. They're talking about Hunt for Red October, aiming into the path of the torpedo before it could arm itself. The same, though, outside of lockdowns, etc., I think is true of the U.S. and Chinese economy. And the COVID lockdown era, it gave Trump the perfect narrative shielding to cut those ties that did visit real short-term economic impact and pain onto the U.S. economy. How could he have done that without that story? Like, the American people we know, normies anyway, are not mature enough to have a president go up there and be like, listen, we're going to do this. It's going to suck for 5 years, and then it's going to get way, way better because we did this. So I almost see them wearing the skin suit of the Great Reset and be like, oh no, look what the globalists are doing to us. Hey, well, now we're on the back end of it, and we no longer are as tied into Chinese trade. The idea of tariffs are way more bipartisan than they used to be. Globalism is way less popular than it used to be. The administrative state that you talk about a lot is as unpopular as it's ever been. And why? Because Trump allowed for the storylines of the Great Reset to play out to a large degree, just, almost like rug pulled them at the last second.
I'm really interested to see what's going to happen over the next few weeks as we kind of hit this inflection point. Because regardless of whether we see an inauguration ceremony on television or we don't, regardless if it's a real inauguration that matters or a fake inauguration, just so the country understands that Trump is now the guy, that's going to be an inflection point in a lot of ways. One of the things is the TikTok, quote unquote, ban that Trump put in 2020. We're going to see that kind of get resolved in some sense, probably some interesting revelations along those lines, potential for the separation between the communication systems. Elon in LA right now is talking about setting up trucks so that the Cybertrucks can provide Starlink for like the entire city to text message one another, so that even if the system as we've been accustomed to is taken down with the push of a button, well, we still have this other thing. There's no way you can take that down, which is what I think the intended purpose of Starlink is, regardless of Elon's actual role in that. I mean, Elon is a face of Defense Department
He's
technology.
Called himself the Tony Stark. It's like he's faker than Tony Stark.
Yeah, and everybody's like, oh, well, Elon thought of this, so he's the hero. Elon might be a hero. I don't know. But not for that. Reason, yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, it's been real. We could go 6-8 hours.
But probably not without severe headaches.
Yeah. I will. Chris is in the middle of his streaming gauntlet. I will transition to you guys, the boosts and the rants. Chris, if you'd like to chill, you can. If you want to head out,
I'll hang out and see what the peeps have to say and see what's going on in the chat.
Probably a bunch of baby stuff. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. I think this is a good intro discussion on sovereignty and statism. We'll have many more. For God's sakes, listen to Chris's podcast. I never have the time to. So
I'm not sure anybody has the time to at this point. I don't even know how I have the time to do it.
I do when he specifically directs me to one that he's like, you should listen to this one.
Let me say one last thing about statism, right? So I talk about groveling a lot online. Yeah. And if you imagine that the state is your superior and you are a subject of that state and you are going to do something because the state says you have to do it, regardless of whether or not it conforms to the Constitution. Like, it's not in the rule book, but because the state says it's in the rule book, therefore it is in the rule book, and therefore you have to follow it, you're groveling, okay? And if you're respecting that social hierarchy and unwilling to criticize someone who's higher up in that social hierarchy, including to their faces, you're groveling. There should be no groveling. That is idolatry, and I don't know why people don't understand that. The state is not your God.
Well said. I'm going to make Chris do Iron Man. I almost picked it for this next week, but under the context of it being the fictional character that Elon Musk, the fictional character, is based off of, which Elon has himself acknowledged. But we will next see each other Tuesday night, Badlands Story Hour. Guys, the movie for Tuesday night is called Free Guy, 2021, directed by Sean Levy, starring Ryan Reynolds. It's about an NPC, a non-player character, who becomes self-aware. Did you get a chance to watch it yet? Did you do your homework?
Yes, I did. I watched it a couple of nights
it?
ago. I find it fascinating. It's told from an obviously like normie commie perspective, which it could be so much better because of that, because they get that dynamic wrong. But otherwise, I think it's a lot of fun. It's funny. They represent the video game world incredibly well. I'll probably watch it again. I liked it, man. I thought it was fascinating.
All right, check that out, guys. Please hit the thumbs up button. It helps us get on the leaderboard. Kick all those people's asses. So, rants. I got boosts from last week. Texas Jules sent $50 over to the narrative. Congrats on Baby Bright's New Year's Day arrival. I couldn't be happier for you both. Cheers and best wishes to your entire family. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody who's reached out. Mrs. Bright is a trooper. I'm looking at her. She's even scarier. Like, so I wonder if she's mad at me anyway. She's a redhead and a wife. So, like, that's going to happen. But when I see her in black and white on a baby cam, I'm like, I can't tell. Those beady little eyes. Can't tell if she's angry at me for keeping her up this late or not. I'm going to guess she is. GDXTC1. $20. Great intro. Good show for the narrative. Thank you very much. Bumbling B, $25. Congrats on Little Bright. Too bad he was born into Generation Beta, but I'm sure he won't be a beta. I know, I was kind of like, what the hell? I learned
we can just rename that.
Yeah.
Why would we take their name or Generation Beta?
Yeah, who the fuck comes up with this? Is this the same people that name hurricanes and comets? Well, like, who is this?
Yes. Also the same people who make hurricanes and comets.
Well, true. Yeah, I'm not gonna allow that. That's gay. Madison Retod, $5. Narrative deployments in the Bible. Quote, a riot at Ephesus, see Acts 19, 24-41. Summary, leader of the silversmiths whips up opposition to Paul for hurting their booming figurine business related to the popular goddess of fertility, Artemis.
Wow.
I would say the Bible is a narrative deployment. Doesn't mean it's fake. It means it's a series of stories.
Yep.
All right, rant. Bullring Films, $50. My favorite show on Badlands, The Kicking Tiger, has replicated. Oh my. And my son is very reasonable, but he kicks if he's mad. He will kick the shit out of you already. Trying to put him in footy pajamas is a trip. Micro Toolmaker, $117. Welcome back, BB. We missed you. Where we go one, we go all. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Tom Terrific, $100. For diapers, you'll need a lot of those. I did have my first moment of picking up a bag of diapers, and then I saw a giant box of them. I put the bag down and made the right choice. Mimi, 2017, $10. Happy for you, BB and Mrs. BB. Husband's family from Canada, too. Oh, interesting. I know most Canadian-American couples I know are Canadian women who went to American men, but you went the opposite there. Interesting. Beachbound 904, $50. Just remember how much we love and respect you. Huge congrats for the beautiful baby Bright. Thank you. R.S. Scriv, $100. Congrats to the brightest family on the planet. God bless you, one and all. Thank you, guys. Counterinsurgent, $20. Oh my God, BB, you've forgotten how to stream. Seriously, though, congrats. Joke's on you. I never knew how to stream. And I don't plan on changing that anytime soon. Nobody, $5. Any thoughts on Lulu being released by the military to join with Bolsonaro for a pincer move? I haven't done much thinking about that.
Well, I mean, he's our boy Lou. So we have our boy Blue, and now this week we have our boy New, our boy Bass, and our boy Lou.
And our boy True isn't done yet. Somebody in the chat last week pointed out to me, they were like, we're probably going to get like a hung government situation in Canada, so our boy True's not done. Siesta Randy, $20. Two of the best Badlanders tonight. Thank you both for all you do to wake people up. It's true. I saw John trolling in the chat because the power level could only grow so high before his alerts go off. Aloha MF, $20. What trade with other countries do we actually need? Yes, I'm serious. All I can come up with is rare earth minerals, and even that's a maybe. I don't know, man. All that lithium in Greenland. Surely that's what Trump's after.
We have plenty of lithium here. We have all sorts of things here. We've been lied to about so many things, and they make resources scarce that are not scarce. And also they make a bunch of the resources that they pretend come from the ground. By the way, did you know that they can make diamonds out of dead people?
I did. Yep.
Did you know that lab-grown diamonds are totally indistinguishable from quote-unquote real diamonds?
Yep.
So how many of the diamonds that are sold as real do you think are dead people?
Many of them.
I would suggest maybe all. And yeah, man, how do you make diamonds out of dead people?
You squeeze them down really, really tight.
Close. I think you got to burn them.
Yep. Man, there was recently
Take that wherever you want to.
there was a giant deposit of lithium discovered in the United States. I think like Arkansas. A couple weeks ago. Man, it's going to be like 20 years worth of lithium. Who'd have known?
Pi Squared in the chat just said that new battery tech doesn't require lithium. There was something odd about lithium today, and I don't think I can. Maybe I'll be able to find it quickly, but something that kind of, you know how some days something just hits you and you're like, I think that's something.
Yep, I think it's being retarded is
extremely retarded at this point.
Yep, it's tough being this way, but somebody's got to do it, I suppose. LKS 9123, $5. I just wish Badlands would spend more time informing us about world events, politics, etc., instead of griping about guys like Tim Pool. Don't care about Tim.
Well, sorry. The controlled opposition info op in the media is like one of the most important things to deal with.
Yeah.
Like hostile actors that appear to us as friends is a problem. It's one of the biggest problems. It's how we always end up back in this spot because we believe we're desperate for allies and need allies. And then we are so desperate for allies that we can't actually call out the huge problems pretending to be on our side. And we have a perfect example of it right there.
If the dudes on the wall in Troy knew that the Trojan horse was bullshit, should they have just shut up about it? The other guys on the wall are like, that looks like a cool fucking horse, guys. I think we should bring it in here and look at it and stuff. And if there was the one dude who was like, I don't think we should do that. I do not think we should let that horse in here. And you, LKS, told that guy to shut up because you didn't care what he thought about the horse.
It's actually like all the guards at the wall yelling, hey, there's soldiers in there. And everybody, and then everybody inside the castle, we really need horses.
we need to unify with those soldiers.
Yeah. They're probably nice guys.
They used to be Trojans. Melindy, in my very humble opinion, I believe we should all step back and re-examine pledging allegiance to the state. Hey, as a idealistic liberal, I used to not do that because I was so angry about the Bush era, and on a long enough timeline, it became right. B. Gerbs, $10 for Baby Bright. Welcome to the narrative that we call Earth. Many blessings on the Bright family.
Indeed.
It's a crazy story. Hevsky, $17. Fantastic show, guys. Thank you. I always enjoy your perspectives. BB, have you talked to Kyle? I've gotten this a few times recently. No, I have not. I have attempted once for full disclosure, and I was responded with that Kyle is done with Badlands, which is what he said publicly, and that's all. That's all I plan for. So, follow who you guys want. Do what you guys want, but that's the truth. Wild Boar, Bright Army increased by 1, so congrats, and Chris Paul should be a co-host. He is a co-host. I think it would kill him if he was permanently on this. Well, with my schedule
this way, it would kill me, right. But,
The universe has a way of
different things, yeah.
Right. It won't be forever, I'm sure. By the way, Mrs. Bright, go in the chat if you are mad at Chris for keeping this show going so late. It was all his fault. Ravelin, $17. When my kids were babies, we used to say dressing an infant is like trying to put an octopus into a string bag. Best wishes, Brights. I've already got his kicking technique down, so like I'll let the kick come out, which puts his leg in perfect position for the zipper to be applied. So I'm already psyoping him. Call sign Cujo. Thank you, BB and Chris. Congrats on Baby Bright. Thank you. Boomer, Chris, was it the meter thing with lithium?
It doesn't ring a bell, but it might be. I don't know what meter thing.
Cam Cooksey, thank you for another episode of The Art of Storytelling by BB and CP. Thank you, guys. That is all of them. Again, if you watch this on replay and you want to send a boost over, just pick the show. Everything gets split with whoever my co-host is. Thank you guys for watching the show. Thanks for showing up. Hit the thumbs up button, please. Check out Chris's show, imyourmoderator.substack.com, because I know none of you have ever heard of him or see him on Saturday nights or Tuesday nights.
It's incredible to me how many Badlands viewers have no idea that I have another show.
Yeah. Every week I get people signing up to my Substack. They're like, I didn't know you wrote this stuff. I'm like, this is what I do. This
crazy.
Is but I guess it's a good thing. But yeah, guys, we do stuff on our Substacks, and it's good. You'll probably like it. So go check it out. Anyway, thanks, Chris, for joining.
Yeah,
Many more to come, I'm sure, and I will see you Tuesday night. Otherwise, you can head out of here and head to sleep, and I am going to outro with the intro and hit you with the tagline. The war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from the truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Milo?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. Now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened. So do all who live to see such time, but that doesn't belong for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time he's given us.
Forgive me. I did not sin. I have failed you all. You will bring me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people
wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.